The heat wasn't just uncomfortable, it was personal. It pressed down on Eliza's neck like a hand trying to shove her into the ground, and the dust coating her clothes had turned to paste where sweat soaked through. She stood in front of the general store with her single battered trunk at her feet, staring at the man who'd just destroyed her life with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. Like I said, Miss Hart, my sister's girl showed up last week. Family comes first. I'm sure you understand. Mr. Pemberton, the man who'd written 3 months ago promising employment as a housekeeper, who'd taken her deposit for the first month's room and board, who'd signed his name with such confident loops she'd believed every word, was already turning away, dismissing her. His shirt was clean and pressed. His boots weren't caked with the filth of 3 weeks on a stagecoach. He looked like a man whose problems solved themselves. I don't understand, actually. Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. You took my money. You confirmed the position twice by letter. I traveled 23 days to get here. He paused, sighed like she was being unreasonable. I'll refund the deposit, of course, minus the administrative costs and postage. Should come to about, $3, I'd say. $3. She'd spent 17 just getting here, had 4 left to her name. The math was brutal and simple. She was ruined. That's theft. Pemberton's eyes went flat. That's business, Miss Hart. Perhaps next time you'll get terms in writing with a lawyer present. Though I have to say, a woman traveling alone out here, making demands. He shook his head slowly. Doesn't set the right tone. Gives people ideas about your character. The threat in that was clear enough. Argue more, and he'd make sure everyone in this dust-trapped town knew she was trouble. She could see how this played out. She'd be the hysterical woman, the Eastern opportunist, the one who didn't understand how things worked out west. And he'd be the respectable businessman who tried to help but got taken advantage of. She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, wanted to drag him by his collar to the sheriff and demand justice that she knew damn well didn't exist for a woman alone with no connections and no proof beyond 2 letters that probably said exactly enough to protect him, and nothing more to protect her. Instead, she said, "The $3 then, now." He made a show of checking his pockets, came up with 2 crumpled bills and some coins, counted it out into her palm like he was doing her a favor. There you are, $2.85. Close enough. I'm sure you'll agree. Then he was gone, back into his store, bell jingling cheerfully above the door like the world wasn't ending. Eliza stood there holding $7 total between her fingers and the understanding that she was completely, utterly alone. No job. The boarding house Pemberton had arranged was, of course, full. His niece had her room. The next town was 2 days by stage, and the fare was more than she had. Going back east would cost everything she'd already spent and then some. Money she didn't have. Money she couldn't get. She could feel eyes on her from the shaded porches, from windows, from the open door of the saloon across the street, watching to see what the Eastern woman would do now that she'd been cut loose. Waiting for her to cry, probably, or collapse. Definitely expecting her to make a scene they could talk about over dinner. She didn't give them the satisfaction. She picked up her trunk. Christ, it was heavy, stuffed with everything she'd thought she'd need for a new life, and started walking. Didn't know where. Just away. Down the main street, past the bank and the dry goods store and the hotel she couldn't afford, past the church with its crooked steeple and the livery stable that smelled like hot manure and hay. The sun hammered down. Her shoulders screamed. She didn't stop. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave up and the land opened into nothing but scrub brush and heat shimmer, she finally set the trunk down. Her hands were shaking. Her throat was tight. The horizon stretched out empty and indifferent, and for the first time since she'd left Philadelphia, Eliza let herself admit the truth. She'd made a catastrophic mistake. She'd left everything behind. A job that barely paid, but at least existed. A cramped room in a boarding house where the landlady watered down the soup but didn't steal. Friends who weren't much but were something. She'd burned it all down chasing the promise of better, of more, of a life that wasn't just scraping by month to month. And now she had nothing, less than nothing. She sat down on the trunk, right there in the dirt, and pressed her palms against her eyes. She would not cry. She would not. You plan on staying there, or is this just temporary? Eliza's head snapped up. A man sat on a horse maybe 20 feet away. Where the hell had he come from? Watching her with an expression that wasn't quite curious and wasn't quite concerned. Somewhere in between. He was maybe 40, weathered in that way men got out here when the sun and wind stripped everything soft away. Dark hair, dark eyes, jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete, dusty clothes, worn saddle, a rifle in the scabbard that probably saw regular use. "I'm fine," Eliza said automatically. "Didn't ask if you were fine. Asked if you were staying there. I haven't decided yet." His mouth twitched. Might have been amusement, might have been something else. "You're the one Pemberton brought in for housekeeping." Not a question. Small towns and their gossip. "I was." He changed his mind. "Heard that too." The man shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. "Also heard him tell the boys at the saloon last night his niece showed up 3 days ago. Took him 72 hours to decide to write you a letter that wouldn't get here before you did. Sounds about right for Frank Pemberton." The casual confirmation of what she'd suspected, that Pemberton had known, had deliberately let her travel all this way just to avoid a conflict, hit harder than it should have. She looked away. "You got people back east?" the man asked. "No." "Money for the stage?" "No." "Place to stay tonight?" "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've got a ranch about 8 miles out. Need help with the house and the girls. Can't pay much, but room and board are part of it. Works hard, and I've got no patience for people who quit when things get difficult. But if you can cook, clean, and not fall apart when a day goes wrong, there's a place." Eliza stared at him. "You don't know anything about me. No, you didn't cry when Pemberton screwed you over. No, you picked up that trunk instead of leaving it for someone else to deal with. No, you walked out of town instead of making a scene." He leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the saddle horn. "No, you're still sitting here instead of giving up, which means you've got some spine. That's more than most. You're offering me a job based on that? I'm offering you work. Whether it turns into a job depends on whether you can handle it. If you can't, you're out, and I'll give you fare to the next town. If you can, we'll figure out terms. Either way, you've got a roof tonight and food that isn't whatever scraps you can afford. Take it or leave it, but decide now. I've got things to do." It was the least romantic offer Eliza had ever received. No false promises, no sugarcoating, no pretending this was anything other than a transaction. Honest work for honest pay, and if she failed, she was gone. The bluntness of it was almost shocking after Pemberton's lies. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Turner. Yours is Eliza Hart. I asked around after I heard Pemberton's plan fell through." "Why?" "Because I need help and you need work, and I don't have time to go through proper channels that'll take 3 months when I've got 3 daughters running themselves ragged, trying to keep up." He straightened in the saddle. "That answer your question?" It didn't, not really. But Eliza looked at the empty road behind her, the town that had already forgotten her, and the $7 that wouldn't last a week. Then she looked at Caleb Turner, who at least wasn't lying to her face. "I can cook," she said. "I can clean. I don't quit." "Then get your trunk. We're losing daylight." The ranch appeared out of the heat shimmer like something half real. Not grand, not impressive, just there. A house that had been added onto in pieces over years, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, corrals that needed mending, and land that stretched out in every direction until it blurred into sky. It looked like hard work, like the kind of place that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you going. 3 girls stood on the porch, stair-step ages, all staring as Caleb pulled the wagon. He'd retrieved it from somewhere, loaded Eliza's trunk without comment, up to the house. The oldest looked about 16, dark-haired and suspicious. The middle one, maybe 13, had her mother's face, Eliza guessed from the painting barely visible through the front window. The youngest was perhaps 9, all sharp eyes and sharper elbows. "Girls, this is Miss Hart. She's going to help around the house. Miss Hart, that's Sarah, Kate, and Lily." Baz. Sarah, the oldest, crossed her arms. "We don't need help." "I'll decide what we need," Caleb said, not unkindly but with the finality of someone who'd had this argument before. "Show her to the spare room. Get her settled. Dinner's in an hour, and I expect everyone at the table. He walked off toward the barn, conversation over. The three girls and Eliza regarded each other in silence. Finally, Kate, the middle one, picked up one end of the trunk. "It's upstairs. You're going to hate the stairs in summer." She wasn't wrong. The narrow staircase trapped heat like an oven, and the spare room, small, plain, with a bed that sagged in the middle and a window that stuck, felt like it had been baking all day. But it was hers, a door that closed, a space that wasn't the street, or a stagecoach, or the charity of strangers. "Bathroom's down the hall," Kate said. "Water pumps out back. We take turns on laundry day, and if you use all the hot water, Sarah will make your life miserable." Noted. Kate hesitated at the door. "Just so you know, we've been fine without help. Pa worries too much." "I'm sure you have been. We don't need someone coming in here thinking they're going to fix everything." Eliza set her bag down carefully. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to work. If that helps, fine. If it doesn't, I'll be gone soon enough." Kate studied her for a long moment, then nodded and left. Eliza sat on the edge of the sagging bed and let herself breathe. The room smelled like dust and old wood. Through the stuck window, she could see land rolling out forever, empty except for the occasional scrub oak and the fence line that marked where Turner's property met someone else's. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like anywhere she'd ever been. But it was something. For now, that had to be enough. Well, dinner was venison stew, bread that was only slightly burned, and tension thick enough to cut. Caleb ate in silence, working through his food with the mechanical efficiency of someone fueling up for more work. Sarah barely touched her plate, shooting looks at Eliza that ranged from suspicious to hostile. Kate ate quickly, like she wanted to be anywhere else. Lily, the youngest, just stared. "Miss Hart can cook starting tomorrow," Caleb said finally. "Tonight was fine, Sarah, but we need someone who can manage full meals while you focus on other things." "I can manage fine," Sarah said tightly. "You're managing too much. School starts in 3 weeks, and you're going back this year." "We talked about this." "We didn't talk. I decided. You're 16. You finish school." Sarah's chair scraped back. "And who's going to handle the garden, the mending, the—" "Miss Hart. That's why she's here. She doesn't know anything about this place. She doesn't know what we need or how we do things or—" "Then you'll teach her." Caleb's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Sarah stop mid-sentence. "You'll teach her, she'll learn, and you'll go back to school. This isn't a discussion." Sarah grabbed her plate and walked out. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the house. The silence that followed was excruciating. Kate pushed food around her plate. Lily had stopped pretending to eat and was now just watching Eliza with unblinking intensity. "She'll come around," Caleb said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Kate, you and Lily clear the table. Miss Hart, I need to talk to you outside." The porch was cooler now that the sun had dropped, but not by much. Caleb leaned against the railing, looking out at land that was slowly disappearing into twilight. "Sarah's been running this house since my wife died," he said quietly. 2 years. "She's good at it, but she's 16 and she deserves a chance to be 16. That means school. That means not carrying all of this." "I understand. She won't make it easy." "I didn't expect easy." He glanced at her. "You handle yourself better than I thought you would. Most people from back east come out here expecting, I don't know, something different. I expected a job with Frank Pemberton. My expectations are already wrecked." That surprised a short laugh out of him. "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment, then, "There's something you should know. There's a man named Garrett Hayes, owns the land north of here along with about half the town. He's been trying to buy me out for 6 months. Why? Water. The creek that runs through my North 40 is the best water source for 20 miles. He wants it, and he's not taking no for an answer. Been using every trick he can think of, legal pressure, social pressure, trying to buy up my credit at the bank. So far I've held him off, but it's getting harder." Eliza frowned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you're working here, you're going to get caught in it. Hayes doesn't play fair, and anyone associated with me is a target. If that's more trouble than you want, say so now." She thought about it, thought about the alternatives, which were exactly none. Thought about Pemberton's smug face and the way this town had watched her fail without lifting a finger. I've already got trouble, she said. Might as well have a place to sleep while I deal with it. Caleb nodded slowly. All right then, work starts at dawn. Don't be late. Eliza wasn't late, but she wasn't prepared either. Dawn meant 4:30 in the morning, when the sky was still more black than blue, and the rooster hadn't even started crowing yet. She stumbled downstairs to find Kate already in the kitchen, building up the fire in the stove with practiced efficiency. Morning, Kate said without looking up. Coffee's almost ready. Breakfast is eggs, bacon, biscuits. Pa and the hands eat at 5:30. They'll want it hot and fast. Hands? 2. Miguel and Jesse, they live in the bunkhouse. Don't talk much, but they work hard. Miguel likes his eggs over easy. Jesse will eat anything. Eliza tied an apron around her waist and tried to remember the last time she'd cooked for 6 people at once. What about you and your sisters? We eat after, usually whatever's left. Kate pulled a bowl of eggs from the cold storage. Sarah's already out with the chickens. Lily's supposed to be getting dressed, but she's probably reading. You'll want to check the biscuit dough. It rises overnight in the cold box. The next hour was controlled chaos. Eliza had cooked before, but not like this. Not on a wood stove that had hot spots and cold spots, and a temperament that seemed designed to burn everything or undercook it with no middle ground. Kate directed her with the patience of someone teaching a child, which was both helpful and humiliating. The eggs were passable. The bacon got crispy without burning. The biscuits came out actually decent, which felt like a minor miracle. When Caleb and the 2 ranch hands came in at 5:30 exactly, they ate without comment, shoveling food down like men who had another 12 hours of work ahead of them. Miguel nodded at her once. Jesse didn't acknowledge her at all. Caleb finished, stood, and said, Noon meal is at 12, same amount. They'll be working the north fence. Then they were gone, and Eliza was left with a kitchen that looked like a disaster area. Sarah appeared in the doorway, took in the mess, and raised an eyebrow. You cook like someone who learned from a book. I cook like someone who's trying not to poison anyone on her first day. Try harder tomorrow. But there was the smallest hint of something not quite hostile in her voice. I'll show you the garden after cleanup. If you're staying, you need to know what we've got and what we need. The garden was impressive, rows of vegetables, herbs, and a small plot near the house, even a few struggling fruit trees that Sarah talked about like beloved but difficult children. She explained the watering schedule, the pests to watch for, what could be harvested now and what needed more time. Her voice lost its edge when she talked about growing things. She sounded younger, less defensive. Who taught you all this? Eliza asked. My mother, before she died. Sarah pulled a weed with more force than necessary. She could grow anything. Even in drought years we had food. I'm not as good as she was, but I'm learning. Seems like you're doing fine. Fine isn't good enough, not out here. Sarah stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Out here, you're either excellent or you're done. There's no middle ground. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of hoofbeats pulled their attention toward the road. A group of riders approached, maybe 5 or 6, moving with the casual confidence of men who owned everything they saw. At the front rode someone who could only be Garrett Hayes. He was maybe 50, built like a man who'd done hard work once but now paid others to do it for him. Expensive hat, clean clothes, a horse that probably cost more than Eliza had made in a year. His smile was wide and friendly and didn't reach his eyes. Caleb around? He called as he pulled up near the house. Sarah's whole posture changed, going rigid. He's working the north fence. Perfect. That's what I came to talk about. Hayes dismounted, handed his reins to one of his men. You must be Sarah. Getting prettier every time I see you. And who's this? Miss Hart. She works here. Hayes looked Eliza over with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. New hire. Caleb must be doing better than I thought, though I have to wonder why he's spending money on help when he could be selling and setting himself up comfortable. We're not selling, Sarah said flatly. Now, darling, that's not your decision to make, is it? That's business between men. He turned toward the north field. I'll just go find your daddy and have a word. He's busy. Won't take long. Sarah moved to block his path. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but Hayes stopped. His smile thinned. You've got spirit. I like that. But you're a child playing at grown-up decisions. Why don't you run along and let the adults handle this? Why don't you get off our land before I get the rifle? The air went very still. Hayes's men shifted in their saddles. Eliza found herself moving closer to Sarah without quite meaning to, though what help she'd be against 6 armed men was questionable. Hayes laughed, breaking the tension. That's the problem with raising girls alone. Caleb should have remarried. They get ideas. He swung back into his saddle. Tell your daddy I stopped by. Tell him the offer's still open, but it won't stay open forever. The bank's getting impatient, and I'm the only friend he's got right now. He rode off, his men following. Sarah stood perfectly still until they were out of sight, then her shoulders sagged. He's lying about the bank, right? Eliza said quietly. Probably not. Pa took a loan last year to buy cattle. Hayes owns the bank, or might as well. His brother's the manager. Sarah's hands were shaking. He's been trying to call the loan early, make it impossible to pay. Legal, but barely. What does your father say? That he'll handle it, that we shouldn't worry. Sarah's laugh was bitter. But I see the ledgers. I know what we've got and what we owe. If Hayes pushes hard enough, we're finished. The weight of it settled over them both. This wasn't just about a ranch. It was about survival, legacy, the difference between having a place in the world and being cast out into nothing. Eliza understood that better than Sarah probably realized. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't push hard enough, Eliza said. Sarah looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. We? You've been here one day, and I've got nowhere else to go, so we might as well be practical about it. For a long moment, Sarah just stared. Then, slowly, something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Noon meal's in 2 hours, she said finally. And you need to learn how to make cornbread that doesn't taste like sawdust. Come on. The days developed a rhythm that was brutal but manageable. Up before dawn, meals for 6, cleanup, garden work, laundry, mending, cooking again, clean up again. Collapse into bed just to do it all over. Eliza's hands developed calluses. Her back developed a permanent ache. She learned which cutting board Sarah preferred for vegetables, how Kate liked her coffee, that Lily would eat literally anything except beans no matter how they were prepared. She also learned the land, the way the creek ran fast in the morning and slow in the afternoon, where the good shade was during the worst heat, which fence posts were rotting and needed replacement, how to read the sky for rain that rarely came. And she learned the family's wounds. Sarah carried everything, always had, probably always would, unless someone forced her to stop. She was sharp-edged and defensive because trusting meant risking, and she'd already lost the one person she'd trusted most. Kate was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made sure everyone ate and kept the house running when Sarah was overwhelmed. She disappeared into chores like some people disappeared into drink, working until she was too tired to feel anything. Lily was angry, at her mother for dying, at her father for not fixing it, at the world for being unfair. She hid it under silence and stares, but it leaked out in small cruelties, forgetting to feed the chickens so someone else had to do it, leaving messes for others to clean, pushing boundaries just to see what would break. And Caleb held it all together through sheer stubborn will, working himself into the ground every day, refusing to acknowledge that his daughters were struggling because acknowledging it meant admitting he couldn't fix it. He was kind in his way, but distant, present, but not there. They were a family held together by routine and necessity, and Eliza understood that introducing any change risked shattering the fragile equilibrium they'd built. So she tried not to change anything. She learned their rhythms, adapted to their needs, made herself useful without making herself intrusive. It was harder than any work she'd ever done. 3 weeks in, Caleb found her after dinner, out on the porch where she'd started sitting for a few minutes each night before bed. "You're doing good work," he said without preamble. "Better than I expected. That's a low bar." He almost smiled. "Maybe, but I mean it. The girls they're eating better. House feels less like we're barely surviving. Sarah's even talking about going back to school without fighting me on it. She's scared you can't manage without her." "I know, but she's 16. She should be scared of dances and boys, not whether we can afford seed for spring planting." He leaned against the rail. I'm going to make the job permanent if you want it. Wage is $30 a month plus room and board. It's not much, but it's honest. $30, more than she'd been making in Philadelphia. Enough to save, maybe, if she was careful. Enough to build something. I want it, she said. Good, because I need to ask you something, and I need you to say no if it's too much. That sounded ominous. What? Hayes is making noise about the North 40 again, claiming there's a survey error from when my father bought the land 40 years ago. Says the boundary line is wrong, and part of what I think is mine is actually his. It's horseshit, but he's got lawyers and paperwork and the kind of pressure that makes judges nervous. I've got a meeting at the county office next week to review the claim. And I need someone here who can keep things running and keep the girls calm if it goes wrong. Sarah will try to come with me, but she can't. She'll fight, and that'll make it worse. I need her here, and I need someone she'll listen to. She barely listens to me. She listens more than you think. You don't push. You don't demand. You just show up and do the work. That matters to her. He met her eyes. So will you do it? Keep things steady while I'm gone? It was trust, real trust, the kind that meant something. And it was terrifying because Eliza had no idea if she could actually do what he was asking. But she said, yes, because what else was there to say? The night before Caleb's meeting, Sarah cornered Eliza in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. He's going to lose, she said without preamble. Hayes has been planning this for months. He's got documents, witnesses, all of it. Pa's just got the original deed and his word. You don't know that. I do. I've seen how this works. Hayes doesn't make moves unless they're already won. Sarah's voice was tight. And when Pa loses that land, we lose the water. When we lose the water, we can't sustain the herd. When we can't sustain the herd, we can't pay the bank. And then we lose everything. Your father's not going to let that happen. My father's one man against someone who owns half the territory. What's he supposed to do? Win through sheer determination? Sarah's laugh was sharp. That's not how the world works. Eliza set down the dish she'd been washing. No. But sometimes the world works because someone refuses to accept the way it's supposed to go. Your father's been doing that since your mother died. You've been doing it every day since. Maybe that's enough. And maybe it's not. Maybe we're just delaying the inevitable. Then we delay it as long as we can and make Hayes work for every inch. Eliza dried her hands. That's all anyone can do. Show up and work and refuse to disappear just because someone decided you should. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then, you sound like you know something about that. I know what it's like when someone decides your life doesn't matter because it's inconvenient for them. I know what it's like to have everything pulled out from under you. And I know the only thing that works is to keep standing up, even when it's stupid, even when it won't change anything, because sometimes it does. And when it doesn't, then at least you didn't make it easy for them. Sarah's smile was small and sad, and the most genuine thing Eliza had seen from her. I think I understand why Pa hired you. Because I was cheap and desperate? Because you're stubborn as hell and too stupid to know when you're beaten. Sarah pushed off the counter. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be bad regardless, and we'll need to be ready. She left Eliza alone in the kitchen with the dishwater cooling and the night pressing in through the windows. Outside, the land stretched away into darkness. Somewhere out there, Garrett Hayes was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his plans and his power and his inevitable victory. Eliza dried the last dish, put it away, and blew out the lamp. If Hayes wanted this family's land, he was going to have to take it from people who'd already survived the worst thing they could imagine. That had to count for something, even if she wasn't sure what. Caleb left before sunrise with documents rolled in oilcloth and a jaw set like he was riding into battle. Eliza watched from the kitchen window as he saddled his horse, checked the straps twice, then rode off toward town without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves hung in the still morning air long after he'd disappeared. Sarah stood beside her, arms crossed tight across her chest. He didn't even say goodbye. He said it last night. That was, see you tomorrow, not goodbye. There's a difference. Sarah turned away from the window. We should get breakfast started. The hands will be here soon, and they don't care about our problems. But her hand shook when she reached for the coffee tin, and Eliza pretended not to notice. The morning passed in tense silence. Miguel and Jesse ate quickly, asked no questions, and headed out to work the south pasture fence that had been sagging for weeks. Kate moved through her chores with mechanical precision, scrubbing things that were already clean. Lily sat on the porch steps with a book she wasn't reading, just staring at the road. "He'll be back tonight," Eliza said, bringing the girl a cup of water. "The meeting's at 10. Even if it runs long, he'll be back by dark. Unless Hayes has him arrested for something." "For what?" "I don't know. Rich people always find reasons." Lily took the water but didn't drink it. Mama used to say Hayes was the kind of man who'd steal your horse and then charge you with theft for asking for it back. "Your mama sounds like she was smart." "She was, and she still died." Lily's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the way children talked about unbearable things because they didn't have the tools yet to make them bearable. Being smart doesn't help if you get sick. Being good doesn't help if someone decides to take what's yours. Nothing helps, really. Things just happen, and you deal with them or you don't. Eliza sat down beside her on the step. The wood was already warm from the sun, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. That's pretty bleak for someone who's 9. I'm almost 10, and it's not bleak if it's true. Maybe, but being true doesn't mean you have to carry it around like that. Sometimes you can know hard things and still choose not to let them make you hard. Lily finally looked at her. "Did someone teach you that, or are you just making it up?" "Little of both." Eliza stood, brushed dust off her skirt. "Come help me in the garden. Those tomatoes aren't going to pick themselves, and your sister will have my head if we let them over-ripen." They worked in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher, heat building toward the oppressive weight it would become by afternoon. Lily was efficient with the picking, careful not to bruise the fruit, separating the ready ones from those that needed another day or two. She'd been taught well. "Miss Hart," Lily said eventually, not looking up from the tomato plants, "if we lose the ranch, where will we go?" The question hit harder than it should have. "You're not going to lose the ranch. But if we do—" Eliza set down her basket. "I don't know. But wherever it is, you'll go together, and that counts for something." "Does it? Counted for a lot when Mama died, and we still fell apart." "You didn't fall apart. You're all still here. You're all still fighting." "That's not falling apart. That's surviving." "Surviving's not the same as living." "No, but it's the necessary first step." Eliza wiped sweat from her forehead. "Look, I don't have good answers for you. I don't know what's going to happen with your father's meeting or Hayes or any of it, but I know your family's tougher than you think, and I know giving up before the fight's even finished is just doing Hayes's work for him." Lily was quiet, considering. Then, "You talk like someone who's lost things before. Everyone's lost things." "Not like you mean it, though. Most people lose things and move on. You lost something and it's still with you." Lily stood, brushed dirt from her knees. "I can tell. You have the same look Pa gets sometimes when he thinks no one's watching." The girl was too observant by half. Eliza picked up her basket. "Come on, we've got enough tomatoes to make sauce for a month if your sister wants to put them up." They carried the baskets back to the house, where Sarah had already started heating water for canning. The kitchen was stifling, the stove turning the room into an oven, but Sarah worked with focused intensity, like if she just kept moving, she wouldn't have time to think about what was happening 8 miles away in a county office. "That's a lot of tomatoes, Gira," Sarah said, eyeing the baskets. "Lily's thorough." "I can see that." Sarah started sorting them, separating sizes with practiced efficiency. "We'll do sauce today, whole tomatoes tomorrow if Pa brings back good news, and we feel like celebrating, if he doesn't." She didn't finish the sentence. The three of them worked through the morning, processing tomatoes in assembly line fashion. Eliza blanched and peeled while Sarah crushed and seasoned and Lily sterilized jars in boiling water. Kate drifted in and out, helping where needed, her usual cheer dampened by the weight of waiting. By noon, they'd filled 24 jars, and the kitchen looked like a massacre had occurred. Tomato seeds and pulp covered every surface. The heat was unbearable. Eliza's hands were stained red and aching from the repetitive work. "We should eat something," she said, wiping her forehead with her sleeve and immediately regretting it when tomato juice smeared across her face. Sarah laughed, actually laughed, sharp and surprised. You look like you lost a fight with the garden. I think the garden won. Eliza grabbed a towel. But we got the tomatoes, so maybe it's a draw. They made cold sandwiches from yesterday's bread and leftover beef, eating standing up because sitting down would mean acknowledging how exhausted they were. Miguel and Jesse came in for their noon meal, ate in their usual silence, and left again. The afternoon stretched ahead, empty except for more work and more waiting. I'm going to check the north fence line, Sarah announced suddenly. See if there's any markers or stakes Hayes might have put down. Your father said to stay here. He said not to come to town. He didn't say I couldn't work our own land. Sarah untied her apron. Besides, if Hayes is claiming part of the North 40, I want to see exactly what he's claiming. Maybe there's something Pa missed, something that proves the boundaries where we think it is. Or maybe you'll find proof he's right. Then at least we'll know. Sarah's jaw set in a way that reminded Eliza forcefully of Caleb. You coming or not? It was a terrible idea. They should stay put, wait for Caleb to return, not go poking around land that was literally under dispute. But Eliza understood the need to do something, anything, rather than sit helplessly while someone else decided your fate. Kate, you're in charge, wir Sam, Sarah called. We'll be back before dark. Kate appeared in the doorway, frowning. Pa said to stay close. We're staying on our land. That's close enough. Sarah was already heading for the door. Come on, Miss Hart. Daylight's wasting. They saddled 2 horses. Sarah on a bay mare named Rosie. Eliza on an older gelding called Charlie, who seemed content to just follow wherever Rosie led. The ride north took them through increasingly rough terrain, land that was good for grazing, but not much else. The creek they were supposedly fighting over wasn't visible from the house, hidden beyond a rise in the land marked only by the cottonwood trees that grew along its banks. That's the boundary, Sarah said, pointing to a fence line that looked identical to every other fence line Eliza had seen. Pa's father built it in '46, based on the survey done when he bought the land. Hayes's father agreed to it, signed papers and everything. Now Hayes claims the survey was wrong and the real boundary is a 1/4 mile south, which would put the creek on his land. Most of it, yeah, and the best grazing, and the only reliable water for miles. Sarah dismounted, tied Rosie to a fence post. If he gets this, we're finished. Can't run cattle without water. Can't pay the bank without cattle. They walked the fence line, Sarah pointing out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, an old lightning-struck tree, the remnants of what might have been survey markers from decades ago. Everything was overgrown, weathered, hard to interpret. Eliza could see how someone with enough lawyers could argue the boundary should be anywhere they wanted it. There, Sarah said suddenly, pointing. Those stakes. Those weren't here last week. Sure enough, new wooden stakes marked a line about 300 yards south of the existing fence, each one painted with red blazes. Fresh dirt around their bases showed they'd been driven in recently. Hayes's new boundary claim, Sarah said flatly. He's not even waiting for the meeting to be over. He's already acting like it's settled. Eliza walked to the nearest stake, examined it. The wood was clean, recently cut, probably from the lumber yard in town. The red paint was still tacky. This had been done in the last day or 2. Can you pull them up? She asked. Probably get arrested for it, tampering with survey markers even if they're fake. Sarah kicked the nearest stake, hard. He's got this plan down to every detail. Even if Pa wins the meeting, Hayes will claim someone damaged his legal markers and demand the sheriff investigate. No matter what happens, we lose. The frustration in her voice was painful to hear. Eliza looked at the stakes, then at the fence line, then back toward the house barely visible in the distance. An idea was forming, probably a terrible one, but terrible ideas were sometimes the only ones available. What if we document everything? She said slowly. Take measurements, note exactly where these stakes are versus where the actual fence is. Get it all written down with dates and details. What good does that do? Maybe none. But if Hayes is going to play legal games, at least we have our own record. Something to show the judge that Hayes was moving boundary markers before the meeting even happened. Shows intent, doesn't it? Shows he wasn't waiting for a legal decision. He was trying to force one. Sarah considered this. We'd need measurements from multiple points. Distances from the creek, from that rock formation, from the old survey markers, and we'd need it signed or witnessed somehow to make it legitimate. Miguel and Jesse could witness. They've been working this land for years. They know where the boundaries are. Hayes will just say they're biased. Of course they're biased, but that doesn't make them wrong. Eliza pulled a small notebook from her pocket. She'd started carrying it to track household supplies and recipes. We'll write it all down anyway. Worst case, it's useless. Best case, it's ammunition. They spent the next 2 hours measuring and documenting, using Sarah's knowledge of the land and Eliza's methodical note-taking to create as detailed a record as they could. Distance from the fence to the creek at 3 different points. Location of each of Hayes's new stakes relative to the established fence line. The old survey markers, barely visible now, but still there if you knew where to look. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finished, both of them dusty and sweating and probably wasting their time. But at least it was something. At least they'd done more than just wait. They were riding back when they saw the dust cloud on the road from town. A single rider, moving fast. "Pa," Sarah said, and kicked Rosie into a gallop. Eliza followed, Charlie doing his best to keep up despite clearly thinking this was all unnecessary excitement. By the time they reached the house, Caleb had already dismounted, and his 3 daughters were surrounding him, talking over each other. "What happened? Did you win?" "Is Hayes inside?" Caleb said, his voice tight. "All of you, now." That didn't sound good. They filed into the house, the girls tense, Eliza hanging back, but close enough to hear. Caleb dropped his saddlebag on the table, pulled out the rolled documents, and spread them flat. "Judge postponed the decision," he said, without preamble. "Needs 2 weeks to review both sides' evidence and consult the original territory survey records." 2 weeks? Sarah's voice rose. "That's exactly what Hayes wanted. 2 more weeks to pressure me, 2 more weeks to work on the judge, 2 more weeks of uncertainty that makes the bank nervous." Caleb's hands flattened on the table. And here's the best part. Hayes submitted new survey evidence this morning. Claims he found the original surveyor's notes from '46 that proved the boundary was always meant to run south of the creek. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Grandfather used those same notes when he built the fence." "I know, but Hayes has documents with the surveyor's signature, and they look legitimate enough that the judge wants time to verify them." Caleb's laugh was bitter. Either Hayes forged them, which he's smart enough to do well, or he actually found something that's been missing for 40 years. Either way, we're in trouble. "We measured the new stakes," Sarah said suddenly. "Miss Hart and I. We documented everything, where they are, when they went in, how they compare to the real fence line." Caleb looked at Eliza. "You did what?" "We took notes," Eliza said carefully. "Measurements, observations. Thought it might be useful to have our own record of what's actually on the ground versus what Hayes claims." For a moment, she thought he'd be angry at them for ignoring his instructions to stay home. Instead, he just looked tired. "Show me." Eliza handed over the notebook. Caleb read through it slowly, his expression unchanging. When he finished, he set it down carefully. "This is good work. Detailed, dated, specific." He looked at Sarah. "Miguel and Jesse would testify to these measurements." "I think so." "Then we'll add it to our evidence. Won't be enough on its own, but combined with the original deed and my father's records, it might help establish that Hayes is manipulating physical evidence, not just paperwork." Caleb rolled the documents back up. "It's something anyway, more than I had an hour ago." The girls visibly relaxed, just slightly. Kate started pulling out what was left of the cold sandwiches. Lily went to pump fresh water. Sarah stood next to her father, close but not quite touching, like she wanted to offer comfort but didn't know how. 2 weeks, Caleb said quietly. "We've got 2 weeks to find something that proves those survey notes are fake, or to find the real notes that support our boundary. Except the real notes are probably lost or destroyed, and proving forgery is nearly impossible without the original to compare to." "What about the surveyor?" Eliza asked. "Is he still alive?" "Died in '63. His son took over the business, but he was just a kid when the original survey happened. Probably doesn't remember anything useful." "Still worth asking." Caleb looked at her. really looked at her for the first time since he'd gotten back. You don't have to be in the middle of this. This isn't your fight. I'm already in the middle of it, and I don't have anywhere else to be, so I might as well be useful. Eliza met his eyes. Besides, I'm getting stubborn in my old age. When someone tries to steal from people I know, it bothers me. Something in his expression shifted, softened just slightly. You're what, 25? 27. Ancient, then. The corner of his mouth twitched. All right, tomorrow I'll ride out to the surveyor's son, see if he's got any of his father's old records. Sarah, you and Miss Hart go through every document we've got in the house. Letters, receipts, anything that mentions the boundary or the creek. Kate, I need you to talk to the neighbors, especially the Richardsons. They've been here almost as long as we have. Maybe they remember something about the original survey. What about me? Lily asked. You stay with Kate and look innocent. People talk more freely around children. Caleb straightened. We've got 2 weeks. Let's not waste them. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Eliza found Caleb on the porch again. He was smoking a cigarette, something she'd never seen him do before, staring out at land that might not be his much longer. Bad habit, he said when he noticed her. Quit years ago, but sometimes the bad habits are all we've got. Eliza leaned against the railing. You think you can win this? Honestly, I don't know. Hayes has money, connections, and apparently documents I can't verify or disprove. I've got stubbornness and a lot of faith in a boundary line my father drew 40 years ago. He took another drag. Not exactly even odds. But you're going to fight anyway. What choice do I have? This land is all I've got to give my daughters. Their mother's buried here, their grandfather built that barn, their great-grandfather cleared the original homestead. If I give it up without fighting, what does that teach them? That you roll over when someone powerful wants what's yours? Some people would say that's wisdom, knowing when you're beat. Some people are cowards. He crushed the cigarette under his heel. I watched my wife die knowing there was nothing I could do to save her. Watched her get weaker every day and couldn't fix it, couldn't stop it, couldn't do a damn thing except hold her hand and lie about how she'd get better. That kind of helplessness. It breaks something in you. Eliza waited, sensing he needed to talk more than he needed a response. So when Hayes comes around thinking he can just take what's mine because he's got more money and better lawyers, part of me wants to let him. Just give up, take whatever buyout he offers, move somewhere easier. Caleb's hands gripped the railing. But I can't, because if I do that, then everything that happened, losing Sarah's mother, struggling these last 2 years, watching my daughters grow up too fast, trying to hold everything together, all of it means nothing. We survived for nothing. Well, surviving always means something. Does it? Or do we just tell ourselves that to make it bearable? Eliza thought about Philadelphia, about Frank Pemberton, about standing in the dust with $7 and nowhere to go. I think we tell ourselves that because sometimes it's true, and we won't know which times until after, so we might as well act like it matters. Caleb looked at her, shadows from the porch light making his face hard to read. How'd you end up here, really? Not the Pemberton story, I know that. But what made you leave Philadelphia in the first place? Fair question, given how much he'd just shared. I was working in a textile factory, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, wages that barely covered a room and food. Did that for 5 years. Then the owner's son decided I should be grateful for his attention, and when I wasn't, he made sure I lost my job. She shrugged. Could have found another factory, another room, another 5 years of the same. Or I could take a chance on something different. Pemberton's offer sounded good. Too good, obviously, but I wanted to believe it. Do you regret it? Coming here? No. Trusting Pemberton? Every day. She smiled without humor. But one led to the other, so I guess I take both or neither. You could still leave. 2 weeks. This whole thing could fall apart. You've got wages saved now, enough to get to the next town, find something safer. Could, but then I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have helped, if staying would have made a difference. Eliza straightened. I'm tired of running from hard things. Might as well stay and see what happens when I don't. Caleb nodded slowly. All right then, but when this goes bad, if it goes bad, I want you to promise me something. What? Promise you'll get the girls out. If Hayes takes the ranch, if the bank forecloses, if any of the worst-case scenarios happen, I need someone to make sure Sarah, Kate, and Lily end up somewhere safe. Not with relatives who'll treat them like burdens, not split up into different households. Together, somewhere they can finish growing up without this hanging over them. The weight of what he was asking settled heavy. That's not going to happen. Promise me anyway. Eliza looked at him, at the exhaustion and fear he was trying so hard to hide, and understood that this was a father trying to make sure his children would be all right, even if he couldn't be there to protect them. Whether through losing the ranch or something worse, he was planning for catastrophe. I promise, she said, but you're going to be there to see them grow up yourself, so it's not going to matter. Maybe, but thank you for saying it. He went inside, leaving Eliza alone with the night sounds and her own thoughts. The land stretched out dark and quiet, indifferent to the human drama playing out on its surface. Somewhere out there, Garrett Hayes was probably planning his next move, confident in his eventual victory. The next morning started the frantic scramble Caleb had outlined. He rode out before dawn to find the surveyor's son. Sarah and Eliza tore through the house looking for any documentation that might help. Old letters, receipts, even the family Bible where births and deaths were recorded in case there was some reference to the land purchase they'd missed. Kate took Lily to the Richardson Ranch, where the elderly couple who'd homesteaded their own property around the same time Caleb's grandfather had bought his greeted them with coffee and stories. Mrs. Richardson remembered the original survey, remembered the fuss when two different surveyors had come through within a month of each other and nearly come to blows over whose measurements were correct. Turned out they were measuring from different starting points, she told Kate, while Lily sat wide-eyed, taking in every word. Your great-grandfather's surveyor used the big lightning-split oak as his marker. The other one, working for the Hayes family, though they were different Hayeses back then, used some rock pile that had probably been moved by cattle or weather. Made their measurements off by a fair bit. Do you remember which surveyor your grandfather used? Kate asked. Same one as your family, man named Thornton, I think. Very precise, very particular. He got sick of the arguing and wrote up a detailed report explaining exactly how he'd done the survey and why his measurements were correct. Even included sketches. Kate's heart jumped. Do you still have that report? Lord, no, child. That was 40 years ago. But I remember your great-grandfather had a copy. Showed it to my husband once when we were arguing about where our properties met. Mrs. Richardson poured more coffee. Have you looked in the old safe? The one in the barn? Kate and Lily exchanged glances. There's a safe in the barn? Well, there was. Big iron thing, built into the wall behind some shelving. Your grandfather kept all his important papers in there. After he died, I assumed your father knew about it. They thanked Mrs. Richardson and rode home fast enough to make the horses nervous. By the time they got back, Sarah and Eliza had already given up on finding anything useful in the house. The few land documents Caleb kept were all copies of things he'd already shown the judge. There's a safe, Kate announced breathlessly. In the barn. Mrs. Richardson says grandfather kept his important papers there. Sarah frowned. I've never seen a safe in the barn. She said it was behind shelving. Maybe it got covered up? They descended on the barn like invading army. Miguel and Jesse, working on a broken harness, watched with bemused expressions as 4 females started pulling down shelves and moving stored equipment. The barn had accumulated 40 years of tools, tack, spare lumber, broken things waiting to be fixed, and general debris. It took an hour of searching before Lily, crawling behind a massive shelf unit loaded with old paint cans, let out a yell. Found it! The safe was exactly where Mrs. Richardson had said it would be, built into the barn's back wall and hidden behind years of accumulated storage. It was iron, heavy, with a combination lock that looked distressingly complex. Does anyone know the combination? Eliza asked. If Pa knew about this safe, he would have mentioned it, Sarah said, which means either he forgot it exists or grandfather never told him. So we're breaking in. Into our own safe, technically. They tried the obvious combinations, birth dates, anniversary dates, years of significance. Nothing worked. The lock was old but solid. not yielding to anything short of actual safe-cracking skills none of them possessed. "We could drill it," Kate suggested, "and destroy whatever's inside if we're not careful." Sarah sat back on her heels, thinking. What numbers would grandfather have used? Something he'd remember but wouldn't write down. "The year he bought the land," Lily said. 1846. Sarah tried it. Nothing. "The year he married grandmother? When was that?" Nobody knew. Their family history had gaps, especially the earlier generations. They tried random combinations until their fingers hurt and frustration was making them sloppy. "Maybe we're overthinking it," Eliza said. "What if it's something simple, like left, right, left with the same numbers?" "Why would that?" But Sarah was already trying it, and on the third attempt, something clicked. The lock gave a satisfying chunk, and the safe door swung open. Inside were documents, lots of them. Deeds, letters, receipts, surveys, all carefully organized and remarkably well preserved. Sarah pulled them out with shaking hands, spreading them across the barn floor. "This is it," she breathed. "This is grandfather's land archive." They sorted through everything, looking for anything related to the boundary dispute. Most of it was routine: bills of sale for cattle, receipts for equipment, correspondence with other ranchers. But near the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, was a thick bundle marked Property Survey Final. Sarah's hands shook as she untied it. Inside were detailed survey notes, complete with measurements, landmarks, and hand-drawn maps. And right there, in careful handwriting, was the surveyor's name, Thomas Thornton, with a date of August 1846. "This is it," Sarah said again, reading frantically. "This is the original survey with all the notes Mrs. Richardson mentioned. Look, he documents every measurement, explains his starting points, even includes sketches of the landmarks he used." Eliza looked over her shoulder. The document was thorough, almost obsessively so. Thornton had measured from multiple angles, cross-referenced his findings, and written detailed explanations for why he'd placed the boundary where he had. And according to his notes, the boundary ran exactly where Caleb's fence was now, with the creek firmly on Turner property. "Hayes's documents have to be fake," Kate said. "There's no way this surveyor made a mistake or changed his mind. This is too detailed." "Unless Hayes found different notes from a different survey," Eliza said carefully. "Mrs. Richardson said there were 2 surveyors working the area around the same time." Sarah flipped through more pages. "Here, look at this. Thornton wrote a letter to grandfather explaining that another surveyor named Webb was doing work for the Hayes family and using incorrect starting points. Thornton even went to the territory office to file a formal complaint about Webb's methodology." "Does it say what happened with the complaint?" "Just that the territory surveyor reviewed both surveys and determined Thornton's was correct based on proper survey practices. It's dated September 1846, signed by, Sarah squinted at the faded signature. "Can't quite read it, but it's official territory letterhead." "We need to get this to your father," Eliza said. "Now." They bundled everything carefully and rode to find Caleb, who was still out questioning the surveyor's son. They found him at the surveyor's office in town, looking frustrated. "He doesn't have anything," Caleb said as they burst in. "His father's records from that era were lost in a fire in '58. He's got some later work, but nothing from, 'Why are you all here?' I told you to stay at the ranch." "We found grandfather's safe, so," Sarah said, breathless from the ride, "with all his original land documents, including the survey that proves our boundary is correct." She spread the documents on the surveyor's desk. The surveyor's son, a man in his 50s named William Marsh, leaned in with professional interest. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "That's my father's handwriting. And his seal." He pointed to a mark in the corner. "We still use the same one. This is definitely legitimate." "Can you verify it?" Caleb asked. "Officially?" "I can verify it's my father's work, yes, and I can confirm his survey practices were sound. He taught me everything I know. But whether this disproves whatever Hayes submitted, that's for the judge to decide." "It's enough," Caleb said, relief flooding his face. "It's more than enough. We've got the original survey, properly documented, with territory verification. Hayes either forged his documents or found notes from a surveyor whose work was officially rejected. Or he's relying on the fact that most of this was lost and couldn't be verified," Eliza added. He couldn't have known this safe existed. Marsh made careful copies of everything, adding his own notarization that the documents were in his father's hand and used his father's official seal. By the time they finished, it was late afternoon, and they had a full portfolio of evidence to submit to the judge. On the ride back to the ranch, the mood was almost celebratory. They'd found the proof they needed. Hayes's claim would collapse under scrutiny. The boundary would stand. But Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to be that simple. Men like Hayes didn't plan elaborate schemes without backup plans. And 2 weeks was still a long time for things to go wrong. She was right to worry. 3 days later, the barn burned down. It started with the horses screaming. Eliza woke to that sound cutting through the darkness, the kind of animal panic that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. She was out of bed and running before she was fully conscious, grabbing her robe as she hit the stairs. Through her window, she could see it, orange light flickering against the night sky. Too bright, too big, growing. The barn was on fire. By the time she reached the yard, Caleb was already there in his nightshirt and boots, Miguel and Jesse materializing from the bunkhouse with buckets. The girls spilled out of the house behind Eliza, Sarah shouting something that got lost in the roar of flames already consuming the barn's western wall. "The horses!" Kate screamed. "They're still inside!" Caleb was already running toward the barn door, and Eliza's heart stopped because she could see what he apparently couldn't. The whole structure was going up fast. Too fast. Like it had been doused with something that wanted to burn. The door frame was already catching, smoke pouring out black and thick. "Caleb, don't—" But he was inside before she could finish. And Miguel was right behind him, and then Jesse. And Eliza was left standing with 3 terrified girls watching their father disappear into an inferno. The horses came out first, wild-eyed and fighting, Caleb dragging Rosie by her halter while she reared and tried to break free. Miguel had Charlie and the 2 workhorses, Jesse brought out the last mare, and then they were all stumbling back, coughing, faces black with soot. "Is that all of them?" Sarah grabbed her father's arm. "Pa, that's all of them." Caleb bent over, hands on his knees, struggling to breathe. "Everything else is gone. Tack, tools, feed, all of it." The barn's roof collapsed with a sound like the world breaking, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. They could only watch as 40 years of accumulated equipment and supplies burned. The bucket brigade they tried to form was useless. By the time they got water from the pump to the fire, it was already spreading beyond what they could fight. "Let it go," Caleb said finally, his voice rough from smoke. "Just make sure it doesn't spread to the house or the bunkhouse. That's all we can do." They worked through the night, soaking the ground around the other buildings, watching for embers that might catch. By the time dawn broke, the barn was a smoking skeleton, still too hot to approach, reduced to charred beams and ash. The family stood looking at the ruins, exhausted and filthy. Lily was crying quietly. Kate had her arm around her sister, her own face blank with shock. Sarah just stared, jaw clenched so tight Eliza could see the muscles jumping. "How did this happen?" Sarah asked finally. "The barn stood for 40 years. It doesn't just catch fire in the middle of the night." Caleb walked closer to the ruins, careful of the heat. He circled around to the western side where the fire had started, studied the ground, then went very still. "What is it?" Eliza asked. He didn't answer, just bent down and picked something up from the scorched dirt. When he straightened, he was holding a glass bottle, partially melted but still recognizable, the kind that held kerosene. "Someone set this," he said quietly, deliberately. The words hung in the air like the smoke still drifting from the wreckage. Sarah's hands curled into fists. Kate went pale. Lily stopped crying and just stood there, something hard and adult settling into her young face. "Hayes," Sarah said. "Not a question. We don't know that." "Who else? We found the documents that prove he's lying, and 3 days later our barn burns down? That's not coincidence, Pa." "It's also not proof." Caleb set the bottle down carefully. And accusing a man like Hayes of arson without proof is a good way to end up in more trouble than we're already in. "So we do nothing?" "I didn't say that." Caleb looked at the bottle, then at the ruins, then at his daughters. "I'm going to town to report this to the sheriff. Get it documented at least. Miguel, Jesse, can you 2 check the property? Make sure there's no other damage?" "Sarah, inventory what we lost. We'll need a list for insurance if the policy even covers arson. What about the documents? Eliza asked. The survey records. Please tell me they weren't in the barn. They're in the house, in my desk. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of soot. I made copies and gave the originals to William Marsh for safekeeping. Even if someone burned down the house, we'd still have proof. That's something, at least. Is it? Because right now it feels like we're playing checkers while Hayes plays chess, and every move we make just gives him another chance to knock us down. Caleb's voice was bitter in a way Eliza hadn't heard before. We find proof, he burns the barn. We rebuild. He'll find something else to destroy. Where does it end? Nobody had an answer for that. The sheriff came out that afternoon, a heavy-set man named Coleman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He examined the bottle, walked around the ruins, took notes in a small leather book, and generally gave the impression of someone going through motions he knew were pointless. Could have been drifters, he said finally. We've had reports of transients camping near the creek. One of them might have gotten careless with a fire, decided to help themselves to your barn for warmth or shelter. In the middle of summer? Sarah's voice was sharp. When it's 90 degrees at night? Strange things happen. People do foolish things. Coleman tucked his notebook away. I'll file the report, but unless you've got witnesses or evidence pointing to a specific person, there's not much I can do. What about Hayes? Caleb said it quietly, but every person there went tense. Coleman's expression didn't change. What about him? We're in the middle of a boundary dispute with him. We just found documents that prove his claim is fraudulent. 3 days later, my barn burns down. You don't find that suspicious? I find coincidences happen all the time. I also find that accusing prominent citizens of serious crimes without evidence is a good way to get sued for slander. Coleman's eyes were hard now. Mr. Hayes is a respected member of this community. He sits on the town council, he's a major employer, and he's got no history of this kind of behavior. You, on the other hand, are facing financial difficulties. You've got a contested land claim, and you might have reasons to want an insurance payout. The implication was clear and infuriating. Sarah looked like she wanted to hit him. Caleb just stood there, fists clenched, clearly calculating whether arguing would make things better or worse. I'll file the report, Coleman said again. But my advice? Get that boundary dispute settled legally and stop looking for conspiracies where there's just bad luck. Good day, Mr. Turner. He left, and the fury that descended on the family was palpable. He's on Hayes's payroll, Sarah said flatly. Has to be. No one's that blind. Or he's just lazy and doesn't want to investigate anything that might be complicated. Caleb watched the sheriff's wagon disappear down the road. Either way, we're on our own. They spent the rest of the day doing damage assessment. The barn was a total loss. All the tack and tools they'd stored there gone. 3 seasons' worth of hay, gone. The spare lumber they'd been saving for repairs, gone. The old safe they'd found, twisted and melted by the heat, its contents destroyed even though the documents had already been removed. The financial impact was devastating. Between the loss of equipment and the cost of rebuilding, they were looking at expenses they couldn't afford. The insurance Caleb carried would cover some of it, but not all, and the payout would take weeks at best. We can't rebuild before winter, Miguel said, looking at the ruins. Not with what we've got saved. And without a barn for shelter and feed storage, we can't keep the full herd through cold weather. Then we sell some cattle now, Caleb said. Take the loss, get enough cash to rebuild something basic before snow flies. Market prices are terrible right now. You'll get half what they're worth. I know, but what choice do we have? None, really. That was becoming a pattern. That night, Eliza found Sarah sitting on what was left of the barn's foundation, just staring at the ashes. The girl looked older than 16, older than she had any right to look. You should get some sleep, Eliza said. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see it burning. Sarah picked up a piece of charred wood, turned it over in her hands. This was my grandfather's barn. He built it with his own hands, log by log. My mother learned to ride in here. I broke my arm falling out of the loft when I was 7. She threw the wood back into the ashes. And now it's gone. And we're supposed to just accept that it was bad luck or drifters or whatever lie makes it easier. You don't have to accept it, but you do have to live with it. That's not fair. No, it's not. Eliza sat down next to her. But fair doesn't factor into any of this. Hayes wants your land, he's got the resources to take it, and he doesn't care what he has to destroy to get it. That's reality. So we just give up? I didn't say that either, but we need to be smart about this. Burning with rage might feel good, but it won't rebuild the barn or win the boundary case or protect your family. Eliza looked at the ruins. Hayes is counting on you to be emotional. He's counting on your father to make mistakes out of anger. Don't give him what he wants. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then, what would you do? If this was your fight, I mean. I'd figure out what Hayes is most afraid of, and I'd go after that. Eliza stood, brushed ash from her skirt. He's not afraid of your father. He's got more money, more power, more connections. He's not afraid of the law. He probably owns half of it. But he's afraid of something, or he wouldn't be working this hard to steal your land. He'd just wait you out, let the bank foreclose, buy it cheap at auction. You think there's something specific about our property he needs? I think a man doesn't forge survey documents and burn down barns unless he's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. Eliza started walking back to the house. Come on. We've got 8 days until the judge's decision, and we're going to spend them figuring out exactly what Hayes is desperate for. The next morning, Caleb rode to the county office to file the insurance claim and check on the status of the boundary case. He came back with news that was somehow both expected and infuriating. Judge moved up the decision, he said, 4 days from now instead of 8. Says he's reviewed the evidence from both sides and doesn't need the full 2 weeks. That's good, isn't it? Kate asked. Means he sees our survey proves Hayes is lying. Or it means Hayes got to him and he wants to rule quickly before anyone notices. Caleb dropped into a chair at the kitchen table. Also, the insurance company is questioning the claim. Want to send an investigator out, which will take at least a week, possibly 2. Of course they do. Sarah slammed a pot down harder than necessary. Is anything going to go right? Not if Hayes can help it. Eliza had been thinking about their conversation from last night, about what Hayes might be desperate for. The water, she said suddenly. It's not just about having water access. There's something specific about that creek. Everyone looked at her. What do you mean? Caleb asked. Mrs. Richardson said there were 2 surveyors arguing about measurements. But why would Hayes's family care about the exact boundary back then? They already had plenty of land, unless there was something about that specific piece of property they needed. It's the best grazing land for miles, Miguel offered, and the most reliable water source. But that's true now. Was it true 40 years ago? Eliza started pacing. What if something changed? What if the creek used to run differently, or the land was used for something else, or there was some other reason that strip of property became valuable? Sarah was already moving toward the shelf where they kept the few family records that hadn't been in the barn. Grandfather kept journals, just basic ranch notes, cattle counts, weather, sales, but he might have mentioned something. They pulled out 3 decades worth of journals, musty and water-stained, but mostly readable, and started searching. It was tedious work, reading through page after page of mundane ranch business. But slowly, a picture emerged. In 1847, just a year after the boundary was established, there were references to prospectors passing through. In 1848, more mentions. Several groups had camped near the creek, panning for gold. By 1849, Caleb's grandfather had written that the prospectors were becoming a nuisance, trespassing to access the creek, digging test holes along its banks. There was gold, Kate breathed, or at least people thought there was. Did they find any? Lily asked. Sarah kept reading. Doesn't look like it. By 1850, the prospectors had moved on. Grandfather writes that the gold fever was just that, fever with no substance. The creek area showed some color, but nothing worth mining. But Hayes wouldn't know that, Eliza said. Or he's found something that suggests otherwise. What if there are new mining surveys? New technology that can detect deposits the old prospectors missed? Caleb stood up. William Marsh. We need to talk to him. If there have been new surveys done in this area, he'd know about them. They rode to town together, the whole family this time, nobody willing to stay behind after the barn fire. William Marsh greeted them in his office, took one look at their faces and said, "What's happened now?" Caleb explained about the fire, the sheriff's uselessness, and their theory about why Hayes was so desperate for that particular strip of land. Marsh listened carefully, then went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. "You might be onto something," he said. "About 3 months ago, Hayes hired a geological surveyor from Denver, a fellow named Pritchard. He spent 2 weeks examining the northern properties along the creek, taking samples, doing tests. Did he find gold? I don't know what he found, but I know Hayes filed mining claims on 3 different properties in the area right after Pritchard left. Not on your land, though. Can't file a mining claim on property you don't own." Marsh spread out a map. Here, here, and here, all neighboring ranches. Hayes approached each owner about buying or leasing mineral rights. Did any of them sell? 2 did. The third, old man named Carson, told Hayes where he could stick his mining claim and kicked him off the property. Marsh smiled grimly. Carson died 4 months ago. Heart attack. His widow sold the ranch to Hayes for pennies on the dollar within a week of the funeral. The room went cold. "You're saying Hayes, Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm not saying anything that could be proven in court. I'm telling you facts. Make of them what you will." Marsh pointed to the map. "But look at the pattern. Every property Hayes has acquired or gotten mineral rights to surrounds your northern 40. Your land is in the middle. If there is gold along that creek, he can't access the richest deposits without your property. So this whole boundary dispute is about forcing you to sell or taking the land through legal manipulation because you won't give it up voluntarily." Marsh sat back. "And if you're wondering whether the judge knows any of this, I'd guess not. Hayes is too smart to connect the boundary case to the mining claims where any one official might notice." Caleb stared at the map, at the pattern of Hayes's acquisitions forming a noose around Turner land. "We need to tell the judge. Show him this map. Explain the mining claims. Make him see that Hayes is committing fraud." "With what evidence? Mining claims are legal. Buying property is legal. Even the boundary dispute looks legitimate on paper. Hayes has survey documents. You have survey documents. The judge has to decide which is valid. Nothing connects Hayes to the barn fire or proves he's systematically stealing your land for mineral rights. Then what do we do?" Marsh thought for a moment. "You prove his survey documents are forgeries. Not just show that yours are legitimate, but actively demonstrate his are fake. That's fraud. That's criminal, and that changes everything." "How do we prove that? The surveyor who supposedly did his work is dead. But the territory surveyor who supposedly verified it isn't, or wasn't, last I heard. Fellow named Morrison, retired to Santa Fe about 10 years ago. He'd be old now, maybe 70, but if he's alive and his memory's intact, he could testify whether he ever verified Webb's survey the way Hayes's documents claim. It was thin. It was desperate, but it was something." "Santa Fe's 3 days' ride," Caleb said. "And we've got 4 days until the hearing. Then you'd better ride fast." Caleb looked at his family, making calculations. "I can't leave them alone, not after the fire. If Hayes is willing to burn down barns, he might—" "I'll go," Eliza said. Everyone turned to stare at her. "You can't ride to Santa Fe alone," Caleb said. "It's dangerous. I can ride well enough, and I'm not afraid of dangerous. You need to stay here and protect your family and prepare for the hearing. Sarah needs to keep the ranch running. Someone has to go, and I'm the only one who can be spared." "Miss Hart, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." Eliza met his eyes. "Hayes took everything from me before I even got here, and I'm tired of men like him winning just because good people are too scared or too tired to fight. So I'm going to Santa Fe, I'm going to find Morrison, and I'm going to get you the testimony you need. Unless you've got a better plan?" Silence. Then Sarah said quietly, "I'll pack you supplies." Within 2 hours, Eliza was on Charlie with saddlebags full of food, water, a bedroll, and directions to Morrison's last known address in Santa Fe. Miguel had drawn her a map marking the safest route and the towns where she could stop for supplies or rest. Caleb had given her money for the journey, more than she'd probably need, his face tight with worry. If this goes wrong, he started. It won't. But if it does, if you can't find Morrison, or he won't testify, or you run into trouble, I want you to promise me you'll turn back. Don't risk yourself for this. Can't promise that. Eliza, you'd ride into fire for your daughters. Let me ride to Santa Fe for your family. We're even then. She settled into the saddle. I'll be back in 3 days. Have the judge ready to listen. She rode out before he could argue further, before the girls could cry, before she could think too hard about what she was doing. 3 days to Santa Fe and back, assuming everything went perfectly, which nothing had so far, so she wasn't counting on perfect. The first day was brutal. She wasn't used to riding for hours at a stretch, and Charlie, while patient, had his own ideas about pace and rest stops. By the time she stopped at a small town for the night, every muscle in her body was screaming. The boarding house room was cheap and clean enough, and the woman who ran it asked no questions beyond whether Eliza wanted breakfast included. She slept poorly, too keyed up and sore to relax, and was back on the road before dawn. The second day was worse. Longer stretches between towns, rougher terrain, and the growing certainty that this was a fool's errand. Morrison was probably dead or senile or had no memory of surveys from 40 years ago. Even if she found him, would he be willing to testify? Would his testimony be enough? But she kept riding because the alternative was turning back, and she'd promised herself in Philadelphia that she was done running from hard things. She reached Santa Fe late on the third day, exhausted and filthy, and hoping desperately that Miguel's directions were accurate. Morrison's address led her to a small adobe house on the edge of town, neat but weathered, with a garden that suggested someone still lived there. An elderly woman answered her knock, looked her over with sharp eyes, and said, "If you're selling something, I'm not buying." "I'm looking for Edward Morrison. I was told he lives here." "Might do. Who's asking?" "My name is Eliza Hart. I work for the Turner family north of here. We're in a boundary dispute, and we need Mr. Morrison's testimony about a survey he verified 40 years ago." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You rode all the way from Turner's ranch?" "Yes, ma'am." "Alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're either very brave or very foolish." The woman stepped back. "Come in. My husband's taking his afternoon rest, but he'll want to hear this." Edward Morrison was indeed old, his face mapped with wrinkles and his hands gnarled with age. But his eyes were sharp and his memory, once prompted, was remarkably clear. "Thornton survey from 46, he said, sitting in a worn armchair while his wife brought tea. "I remember that one. There was a dispute with another surveyor, Webb, worked for the Hayes family. Webb was sloppy, used improper methods, started his measurements from a cattle-moved rock pile instead of the designated benchmark. Thornton filed a formal complaint. And you verified Thornton's survey was correct?" "I did. Rode out there myself, checked his measurements, reviewed his methodology. He was thorough, proper, everything by the book. I wrote up a report saying Webb's survey was invalid and Thornton's should be the legal boundary." Morrison sipped his tea. "Why? Has someone challenged that?" Eliza explained the whole situation: Hayes's forged documents, the boundary dispute, the barn fire, the mining claims. Morrison's face grew darker with each detail. "Hayes is claiming I verified Webb's survey?" he said finally. "He's got documents with your signature saying exactly that. Then they're forged. I never verified Webb's work because it was incompetent, and I certainly never signed anything contradicting my official report." Morrison stood, moving to a desk in the corner. "I keep copies of all my official correspondence. Started doing it after a dispute in 49 where someone tried to claim I'd approved faulty work. Let me see." He rummaged through drawers, pulling out folders and loose papers, muttering to himself. His wife helped, the two of them clearly having done this dance before. Finally, Morrison straightened with a triumphant sound. "Here, my original report from September 1846, declaring Thornton's survey valid and Webb's invalid, complete with my signature and official seal." He held up the yellowed document. "And here's my correspondence file from that year. Not one letter to or from the Hayes family about Webb's survey." Eliza could have cried with relief. "Will you testify at the hearing?" Young lady, I'm 73 years old and it's a 3-day ride to the county office. My testifying days are over. He saw her face fall and held up a hand. But I'll do better. I'll write a sworn affidavit, notarized and official, explaining exactly what I verified and didn't verify. And I'll include copies of my original report and correspondence. That'll hold up in any court. That would be... Thank you. Thank you so much. Morrison and his wife worked through the evening preparing the documents, making sure everything was properly witnessed and notarized. By morning, Eliza had a packet of papers that comprehensively destroyed Hayes's claim, signed by the one man whose testimony couldn't be questioned. She rode back faster than she'd come, pushing Charlie harder than she should have, but unable to help it. The hearing was tomorrow. She had to make it. She arrived at the Turner Ranch at sunset the night before the hearing, so exhausted she could barely stay in the saddle. Caleb was waiting on the porch, clearly having been watching the road for hours. When he saw her, relief washed over his face so completely it was almost painful to witness. "You found him." "I found him." Eliza dismounted, nearly fell, caught herself on the saddle. "And he gave us everything we need." Sarah appeared from the house, then Kate and Lily, all of them surrounding her, taking Charlie's reins, helping her inside. She was too tired to protest. Just let them guide her to a chair while she explained what Morrison had provided. Caleb read through the documents with shaking hands. "This is it. This proves Hayes forged the verification. This proves fraud." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "It has to be." Caleb looked at Eliza. "You just saved our ranch. You know that, right?" Eliza was too tired to process the weight of that statement. "Ask me again after the hearing, when we've actually won." But that night, for the first time since the barn burned, the family went to bed with something like hope. The county office looked different in daylight, with everything riding on what happened inside. Eliza had passed it dozens of times during her trip to Santa Fe. But now, standing in front of the squat stone building with its official seal and barred windows, it felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. Caleb stood beside her, freshly shaved and wearing his best suit, the one he'd probably married in, judging by how it pulled slightly across shoulders that had broadened with years of ranch work. Sarah, Kate, and Lily waited with Miguel and Jesse near the wagon, all of them dressed in their Sunday clothes, presenting as respectable a front as possible. The girls had argued about coming, but Caleb had finally relented, saying they had a right to be there when their future was decided. Hayes was already inside, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers. He looked comfortable, relaxed even, like a man who'd already won and was just going through formalities. When he saw the Turners enter, his smile widened. "Caleb, ladies, I'm sorry about your barn. Terrible tragedy. If you need help rebuilding, I'd be happy to extend a loan at favorable rates." His voice carried across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear his generosity. "We'll manage," Caleb said shortly. Of course. Pride is admirable, though it doesn't rebuild structures or feed cattle through winter." Hayes turned to one of his lawyers. "Perhaps after today's ruling, we can discuss more permanent solutions to the Turner family's difficulties." The threat wasn't even veiled. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, and Eliza put a warning hand on her arm. Getting into a fight before the hearing started wouldn't help anyone. Judge Whitmore entered through a side door, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and the tired expression of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed and stupidity. He settled behind his desk, arranged some papers, and looked over his glasses at the assembled group. "We're here to settle the boundary dispute between Garrett Hayes and Caleb Turner regarding the northern 40 acres of the Turner property. Both parties have submitted evidence. I've reviewed the initial materials. Does either side have additional evidence to present before I make my ruling?" One of Hayes's lawyers stood. "Your Honor, we believe our submitted materials are comprehensive and conclusive. The Webb survey clearly establishes—" "We have new evidence," Caleb interrupted. "Critical evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Hayes's claims." Hayes's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The judge gestured for Caleb to continue. Caleb presented Morrison's affidavit, the original territory report, and the correspondence files. He explained carefully, methodically, how Hayes's documents claim Morrison had verified Webb's survey when Morrison's own records proved he'd done the opposite. He laid out the timeline, the contradictions, the impossibility of both sets of documents being legitimate. The judge read through everything slowly. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning. Hayes's lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. Hayes himself sat perfectly still, but his jaw had tightened. Finally, Judge Whitmore set down the papers. Mr. Hayes, your submitted documents include a verification letter allegedly signed by Edward Morrison in September 1846. Mr. Turner has now presented an affidavit from that same Edward Morrison stating he never verified Webb's survey and, in fact, rejected it as faulty. Additionally, Mr. Morrison has provided his original report from that period, also dated September 1846, which directly contradicts the letter you submitted. How do you explain this discrepancy? One of Hayes's lawyers stood quickly. Your Honor, we obtained our documents through legitimate historical research. If there are discrepancies, it's possible Mr. Morrison's memory has failed in his advanced years, or that there were multiple surveys and multiple verifications that have since been confused. Mr. Morrison provided original documents with his signature and official seal, the judge interrupted. Not memories, documents, created at the time in question. Your letter has his signature but no seal, which is irregular for official territory business. It also uses phrasing that wasn't common in 1846, but became standard in the 1850s. He held up the two documents side by side. Either Mr. Morrison is lying about his own work, which seems unlikely given he's provided contemporaneous proof, or someone has forged this verification letter. Which is it? Your Honor, we object to the implication. I'm not implying. I'm stating directly that one of these documents is fraudulent. Judge Whitmore's voice was sharp now. And given that Mr. Morrison is a retired territory surveyor with an impeccable 40-year record, while your client has a demonstrated interest in acquiring Turner land at any cost, I'm inclined to believe his version. Hayes finally spoke, his voice smooth and reasonable. Your Honor, with all respect, I purchased these documents in good faith from a historical researcher in Denver. If they're fraudulent, I'm as much a victim as anyone. I had no knowledge. You submitted fraudulent documents to this court to steal another man's land. The judge's patience was clearly exhausted. Whether you forged them yourself or paid someone else to do it is irrelevant to the outcome of this case. The Thornton survey is verified by official territory records. The Webb survey is not. The boundary stands as originally established, running along the existing Turner fence line. Sepuski chi imaise. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning fully registered. They'd won. The land was theirs. The boundary stood. Sarah grabbed Kate's hand, squeezing hard. Lily let out a breath she'd been holding for what seemed like hours. Caleb just stood there, looking like a man who'd been bracing for a blow that never came. But Hayes wasn't finished. Your Honor, I understand your ruling on the boundary dispute, but I feel compelled to inform the court that regardless of today's decision, I've filed mining claims on the creek area. The mineral rights are separate from land ownership, and you filed mining claims on property you don't own? Judge Whitmore's eyebrows rose. That's legally problematic, Mr. Hayes. I filed claims on the disputed area pending the outcome of this hearing, standard procedure when ownership is unclear. Ownership is no longer unclear. I've just ruled the land belongs to Turner, which means your mining claims are invalid. The claims were filed in good faith based on the survey evidence we possessed at the time. The survey evidence you possessed was fraudulent. The judge's voice was ice now, which means every action you took based on that evidence, including mining claims, land acquisitions, and anything else, is subject to review and potential legal consequences. Hayes's face went very still. For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. Your Honor, I assure you I acted in good faith throughout. That's for another court to determine. For now, I'm ruling in favor of Turner. The boundary stands as established by the Thornton Survey of 1846. Mr. Hayes's claim is denied. Furthermore, I'm recommending this matter be referred to the territorial prosecutor for investigation of potential fraud. Judge Whitmore gathered his papers. We're adjourned. He left through the side door, and the room erupted in noise. Hayes's lawyers immediately surrounded him, talking urgently. Hayes himself stared at Caleb with an expression that mixed rage and calculation in equal measure. This isn't over, he said quietly, loud enough for only those nearby to hear. You may have won the land, but you're still drowning in debt. The bank still owns you. I still own the bank. Then I guess we'll have to solve that problem too, Caleb said, his voice remarkably steady. Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good luck with that, Turner. You're going to need it. He left with his lawyers in tow, and the Turners were left standing in the suddenly quiet office, trying to process what had just happened. We won, Kate said, like she couldn't quite believe it. We actually won. We won the boundary dispute, Caleb corrected. Hayes was right about one thing. We still owe the bank, and he still has leverage there. This buys us time, but it doesn't solve everything. It solves the immediate crisis, Eliza said. The land is legally yours. Hayes can't take it through fraud or boundary manipulation. That's worth celebrating. Sarah was reading through the copies of the judge's ruling, her face intense with concentration. The judge referred it to the prosecutor. That means Hayes could face criminal charges, fraud, forgery, maybe more if they investigate the barn fire. Don't count on it. Caleb took the papers from her. Hayes has too many friends in high places. He'll find a way to make this someone else's fault. Blame the researcher who allegedly sold him the fake documents. Claim he was misled. Whatever story makes him the victim instead of the criminal. So he gets away with it. Maybe, probably, but he doesn't get our land, and that's what matters. They walked out into sunlight that seemed brighter than it had any right to be. Miguel and Jesse were waiting by the wagon, and when they saw the family's faces, they understood without being told. Miguel actually smiled, which Eliza had never seen before. So we keep the North 40? He asked. We keep all of it, Caleb confirmed. Every acre. The ride back to the ranch should have been triumphant, but there was a heaviness to the silence that spoke to how much this victory had cost, and how much was still uncertain. They had the land, but the barn was still gone. They had legal ownership, but the bank still held their debt. Hayes had been defeated, but he was still powerful, still dangerous, still capable of making their lives difficult. When they reached the ranch, the burned shell of the barn was the first thing visible, a stark reminder that winning one battle didn't mean winning the war. But Lily surprised everyone by hopping down from the wagon and walking straight to the ruins. We should start clearing this tomorrow, she announced. Can't rebuild until we clear the old structure, and the sooner we start, the sooner we have a barn again. Her practical determination broke something in the tension. Kate laughed, actually laughed, and said, Since when are you in charge of construction? Since nobody else was saying it, we won. Now we work. That's how it goes, right? Sarah ruffled her youngest sister's hair. That's exactly how it goes. That evening, the whole ranch gathered around the kitchen table. The family, Miguel and Jesse, even William Marsh, who'd ridden out when he heard about the ruling. They shared the simple meal Sarah and Eliza had prepared, and for the first time in weeks, the conversation wasn't about land disputes or legal threats or financial ruin. It was about rebuilding plans, about which cattle to sell and which to keep, about whether they should plant winter wheat in the south field. Normal problems, manageable problems, the kind you could solve with work instead of lawyers. Later, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Eliza found herself on the porch again with Caleb. It had become their spot, the place where real conversations happened after the day's performance was over. Morrison's affidavit saved us, Caleb said. If you hadn't ridden to Santa Fe, if you hadn't found him, if he'd been dead or unwilling to help, we'd have lost everything. You would have found another way. Would I? Because right up until you came back with those documents, I was planning for failure. Figuring out how to get the girls somewhere safe when we lost the ranch, where we'd go, how I'd tell them I couldn't protect them. He stared out at the dark land. You gave us a chance when I'd already given up. I gave you evidence. You're the one who fought for 40 years to keep this place running. 40 years isn't as impressive when you consider I almost lost it all in 40 days. Caleb turned to face her. I owe you more than wages and room and board. You know that. You don't owe me anything. I needed work. You gave it to me. Everything else was just doing what needed doing. That's not how I see it. He was quiet for a moment. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer, slow and cruel. Spent 6 months watching her fade, knowing every day might be the last, powerless to stop any of it. After she was gone, I told myself I just needed to keep the ranch running, keep the girls fed and clothed, maintain what we had. That was enough. That was all I could manage. Eliza waited, sensing this was going somewhere important. Then you showed up, desperate and stranded and refusing to quit even when you had every reason to. And you didn't just work, you cared. About the ranch, about the girls, about fighting Hayes when it would have been easier to stay out of it. You reminded me that just maintaining isn't the same as living, and that sometimes caring about something is worth the risk of losing it. Caleb, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable. I'm saying it because it's true. And because you deserve to know that what you've done here matters. Not just the legal victory or the evidence from Morrison, but showing up every day and choosing to be part of this fight when you could have walked away. He met her eyes. You've become part of this family, whether you meant to or not. And I hope you'll stay. Not because we need the help, though we do, but because you belong here. The words settled into the space between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza had spent so much of her life not belonging anywhere, always temporary, always an outsider. The idea that she might actually have found a place, a home, was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. I'll stay, she said finally. For now. See how the rebuilding goes. But Caleb, don't make me into something I'm not. I'm not a hero. I'm just stubborn, and I hate people like Hayes who think they can take whatever they want. That's not noble. It's just personal. Sometimes the best reasons are personal. He smiled, something genuine breaking through the exhaustion that had lived in his face for weeks. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start clearing the barn site, and Miguel says it's going to be brutal work. The next morning proved Miguel right. Clearing burned timber was hot, dirty, dangerous work that left everyone covered in soot and nursing splinters and minor burns. But there was something satisfying about it too, about physically removing the evidence of Hayes' attack and making space for something new. They worked through the day, the whole family plus the ranch hands, taking breaks only when the heat became unbearable. By evening, they'd cleared about a quarter of the debris, and the pile of salvageable materials, mostly metal hardware and a few unburned beams, was pitifully small. We're going to need a lot of lumber, Sarah said, wiping her forehead and leaving a streak of ash. More than we can afford, probably. Then we start small, Caleb said. Build enough structure to shelter the horses and store winter feed. Finish the rest next spring when we've sold cattle and saved up. That's going to be tight. Everything's tight. We make it work anyway. 2 days later, a wagon appeared on the road. Then another, and another. By noon, there were 6 wagons parked in the yard, and Eliza had no idea who any of these people were until Mrs. Richardson climbed down from the first wagon with a basket of food. Heard you won against Hayes, she announced. Figured you could use some help rebuilding. I'm all set to Charles. The other wagons belonged to neighboring ranchers, families the Turners had known for years, but who'd stayed carefully neutral during the boundary dispute. Now they'd come with lumber, hardware, labor, and food, ready to raise a barn the old-fashioned way. We can't pay you, Caleb said, clearly overwhelmed. Didn't ask you to, said one of the ranchers, a grizzled man named Stevens. Hayes has been pushing everyone around here for years, buying up properties, forcing out families who've been here since before the territory was organized. You stood up to him and won. That's worth supporting. Another rancher, younger but with the same weathered look they all had, added, Besides, today it's your barn. Tomorrow it might be my fence or Richardson's well. We look out for each other, or Hayes picks us off one by one. By late afternoon, the barn site was swarming with people. The men worked on framing while the women organized materials and kept everyone fed. The children, including Lily and Kate, hauled water and ran messages and generally stayed underfoot in that way children did when adults were doing interesting work. Sarah worked alongside the men, her carpentry skills apparently better than most, directing placement of beams and checking measurements with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this her whole life. Eliza helped where she could, mostly with food preparation and organization, watching a community come together to rebuild what one man had tried to destroy. By the end of the second day, the basic frame was up. It wasn't finished, wasn't weatherproofed, wasn't anywhere near as substantial as the barn they'd lost. But it was a barn, functional enough to store hay and shelter horses, and it had cost them nothing but sweat and gratitude. We'll come back in a month, Stephen said as families started packing up to leave. Help finish the walls and roof before winter. Between all of us, we'll have you squared away by first snow." After they left, the Turner family stood looking at their new barn, this physical manifestation of community support and shared defiance against Hayes's bullying. "I didn't know they'd do this," Caleb said quietly. "I thought we were alone in this fight." "Nobody's alone unless they choose to be," Mrs. Richardson had said before leaving. "You just have to be willing to accept help when it's offered." The next week brought a letter from the bank. Eliza watched Caleb's face as he read it, trying to gauge whether this was more bad news or just routine business. His expression gave nothing away until he finished and set the letter down carefully. "They're calling the loan, sir," he said. "Full payment due in 30 days. Sarah's face went white. "They can't do that. We're current on payments." "There's a clause that allows them to call the full loan if they determine the property value has decreased significantly. They're citing the barn fire as justification." Caleb's voice was flat. "We owe them $3,000. We've got maybe $800 in savings. Even if we sell every head of cattle we own, we'd still be short." Kate said bitterly. "This is Hayes punishing us for winning." "Probably. His brother manages the bank. But knowing it and proving it are different things, and either way, we've got 30 days to come up with money we don't have." The brief hope from the hearing victory evaporated. They'd won the land only to lose it anyway, just through different means. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "There has to be something we can do," Eliza said. "Some legal recourse, There's nothing. The loan terms are legal. The bank's within their rights." Caleb stood up, walking to the window. "I can try to negotiate an extension, but Hayes will make sure they refuse. We're out of options." Silence fell heavy over the kitchen. Everything they'd fought for, every risk they'd taken, every small victory they'd won, all of it meaningless in the face of this financial reality. Then Lily said, "What about the gold?" Everyone turned to stare at her. The gold that Hayes wanted, the reason he was trying to steal our land in the first place. Lily looked at her father. "If there's gold on our property, if that's why he filed all those mining claims, couldn't we mine it ourselves? Get enough to pay the bank?" "Lily, we don't know if there's actually gold," Sarah said gently. "Hayes thought there might be, but the prospectors in 49 found nothing. It could all be speculation. Or it could be real, and the old prospectors just didn't have good enough equipment." Lily crossed her arms. "We've got 30 days. We could at least look. What do we have to lose?" Caleb and Sarah exchanged glances. The idea was desperate, probably foolish, almost certainly a waste of time they didn't have. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and they were definitely desperate. "William Marsh might know someone," Caleb said slowly. "Someone who could assess whether there's anything worth mining. If there is, we'd need to file our own mining claim, get equipment, actually extract enough gold to matter. All in 30 days. "Impossible," Sarah said. "Probably. But Lily's right. What do we have to lose?" Caleb grabbed his hat. "I'm riding to town to talk to Marsh. Sarah, you're in charge. Miss Hart, keep everyone from doing anything stupid while I'm gone." He left at a gallop, and the women were left looking at each other with a mixture of hope and dread. "This is crazy," Kate said. "Completely," Sarah agreed. "But we're doing it anyway," Eliza finished, "because crazy is all we've got left." Caleb returned the next morning with a wiry man in his 40s who introduced himself as Davis, a geologist who'd worked mining operations throughout Colorado and New Mexico. He looked skeptical about the whole endeavor, but agreed to survey the creek area for a percentage of anything found. They spent 2 days at the North 40 while Davis took samples, examined rock formations, tested the creek water, and generally did things that looked scientific but yielded no immediate results. Eliza watched him work with growing anxiety, knowing each day that passed was one less day they had to actually do something with whatever he found, if he found anything. On the third day, Davis sat down with Caleb and spread out his notes. "There's gold," he said without preamble. "Not a lot, not easy to extract, but it's there. The creek's cutting through a quartz vein that's carrying color. The old prospectors missed it because they were panning the creek bed. The real deposits are about 6 feet down in the banks." How much gold are we talking about? Hard to say exactly without deeper excavation, but based on the samples, I'd estimate maybe $4,000 to $6,000 worth if you can extract it efficiently. More if the vein goes deeper than I can test with hand tools. 4 to 6,000. Enough to pay the bank and have money left over, if they could extract it, in 27 days. What do we need, Kitos? Caleb asked. Davis laid it out: proper mining equipment, at least 6 workers who knew what they were doing, permits and claims filed with the territory, and time. Lots of time. More than 27 days, probably. How much time? Sarah asked. 2 months minimum, 3 to be safe, and that's assuming everything goes right, which it never does. The hope that had been building deflated. They didn't have 2 months. They didn't even have one. But Eliza was thinking about something else. What if we don't extract it all? What if we just extract enough to prove the deposit exists, then use that as collateral with the bank? Show them we've got assets that make the property more valuable, not less. Davis considered this. That could work. You'd need maybe $1,000 worth extracted to prove the deposit's real and substantial. That's doable in a month if we work fast and don't run into complications. And if we do run into complications, then you're in the same position you're in now, just dirtier and more tired. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, and something was better than the nothing they'd had an hour ago. Let's do it, Caleb said. The mining operation started before dawn the next morning with equipment Davis had somehow procured overnight: shovels, pickaxes, wooden supports for shoring up excavation walls, and a small sluice box for processing ore. Caleb had hired 4 men from town who'd worked mining claims before, paying them wages he couldn't afford with money he didn't have, betting everything on gold that might not exist in quantities that mattered. Eliza watched the organized chaos from the creek bank, holding coffee for workers who'd grab a cup between shifts of digging. The plan was brutally simple: excavate along the creek bank where Davis's tests showed the richest deposits, extract the gold-bearing quartz, crush it, and process it through the sluice. Do this 16 hours a day for 26 days, and hope they hit their $1,000 target before the bank's deadline. Sarah worked alongside the men, swinging a pickaxe with the same grim determination she brought to everything else. Kate and Lily hauled water and sorted rocks, their hands blistering despite the gloves Eliza had insisted they wear. Miguel and Jesse had taken over all the regular ranch work, running the place essentially alone so everyone else could focus on the impossible task of mining enough gold to save their home. By the end of the first day, they'd moved approximately 3 tons of dirt and rock, processed maybe half of it through the sluice, and recovered gold flakes worth about $12. At this rate, we'll have our 1,000 in 83 days, Sarah said, collapsing onto the porch that evening, which is 57 days too late. We're still figuring out the process, Davis said, though he didn't sound convinced. Tomorrow will be faster. They weren't faster. The second day yielded $15. The third day, the excavation wall collapsed, nearly crushing one of the hired workers and setting them back half a day while they reshored everything. They recovered $8 worth of gold. Caleb sat at the kitchen table that night doing math that refused to work out no matter how many times he recalculated. We've got 23 days left and we've recovered $35. Even if we double our efficiency, which we won't, we're not going to make it. Then we work longer days, Sarah said. Start earlier, finish later. We're already working dawn to dark. Push harder and someone's going to get seriously hurt. Caleb dropped his pencil. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should have used this time looking for other options. What other options? Kate asked. There aren't any. This is it. The desperation in her voice was painful to hear. Eliza had watched these girls transform over the past months from guarded and defensive to cautiously hopeful, and now that hope was slipping away into the reality of creek mud and insufficient gold flakes. We need more workers, Eliza said suddenly. More people digging means more dirt moved means more gold processed, even if we can't afford to pay them. Where are we going to find workers willing to work for free? Caleb asked. The same place we found people willing to raise a barn for free. The community. Everyone who helped rebuild. Everyone who's tired of Hayes pushing them around, Ask them. Not for charity, for partnership. Give them a percentage of whatever we recover. Davis looked up from his own calculations. That could work. If we had, say, 15 people working instead of 7, we could triple our output, cut the timeline to something manageable, and cut our profits to almost nothing after we pay everyone their share, Sarah pointed out. We don't need profits. We need $1,000 and proof the deposit exists. Eliza stood up. Caleb, you've got friends here, people who already proved they'll support you. Ask them. Worst they can say is no. The next morning, Caleb rode to the Richardson ranch and laid out the situation honestly. They needed help. They couldn't pay wages, but they'd split any gold recovered proportionally among everyone who worked. Old man Richardson listened, nodded slowly, and said he'd be there tomorrow with his 2 sons. By the end of the week, they had 17 people working the claim in rotating shifts. The Richardsons, Stevens, and his crew, several other neighboring families who'd decided that helping the Turners was the same as helping themselves stand against Hayes. The operation grew from desperate scrambling to something almost organized, with Davis directing excavation while Sarah coordinated processing and Caleb managed logistics. The gold recovery increased, $25 one day, $32 the next, $41 the day after that. Still not enough, still too slow, but moving in the right direction. The growing pile of gold dust and small nuggets in the glass jar Davis used for collection started to look like it might actually mean something. Then Hayes showed up. He rode in with Sheriff Coleman and 2 deputies, all of them armed, all of them wearing expressions that said this wasn't a social call. The workers stopped digging, sudden silence falling over the creek site. Morning, Caleb, Hayes said pleasantly. Heard you were doing some mining. Thought I'd check on your permits. We filed our claim with the territory office, Caleb said, wiping mud from his hands. It's all legal. Filed it on Monday, I believe. But you started excavation on Sunday. That's a day of illegal mining on territory land before your claim was registered. Hayes' smile widened. Sheriff Coleman here tells me that's a violation of territory mining regulations. Could result in forfeiture of your claim and any gold already recovered. Coleman looked uncomfortable but nodded. The law is pretty clear on this, Caleb. You can't start work before the claim's registered. I'm going to have to shut you down until it's sorted out. That's ridiculous, Sarah burst out. We started prep work on Sunday, just clearing the site. The actual mining started Monday after the claim was filed. That's not how 3 witnesses remember it. Hayes gestured to 3 men Eliza didn't recognize, probably on his payroll. They'll testify they saw excavation and ore processing happening Sunday morning. That's mining, not preparation. It was a trap, carefully constructed and perfectly timed. Even if they fought the claim in court, it would take weeks to resolve, and they didn't have weeks. They had 19 days. Davis stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Hayes, I was here Sunday conducting final geological surveys before the claim was filed. No excavation occurred, no ore was processed, just testing and surveying, which is explicitly allowed under territory regulations for claim assessment. Your word against 3 witnesses. My word as a licensed geologist with territory credentials against 3 men whose names aren't even on the claim paperwork because they weren't here. Davis pulled out his survey log. I documented everything, including photographic evidence showing the site condition Sunday morning before any work began. That was a lie. There were no photographs, but Hayes couldn't prove there weren't, and suddenly his 3 witnesses seemed less reliable than a credentialed professional with documentation. Hayes' expression hardened. This isn't over, Turner. You're operating an illegal mining operation on land that's about to be foreclosed on. The bank wants their money, and no amount of creek mud is going to save you. Maybe not, Caleb said, but we're going to try anyway. Now get off my property before I have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing. Hayes looked at Coleman, who suddenly became very interested in his boots. Whatever hold Hayes had on the sheriff apparently didn't extend to arresting a man on his own legally owned land while he was legally mining a properly filed claim. 19 days, Turner. Then it's all mine anyway. Hayes rode off, his fake witnesses trailing behind. The moment he was out of sight, Davis let out a breath. We need to move faster. He's going to find another way to shut us down. Then we work in shifts around the clock, Stephen said. Some of us sleep while others dig. We can keep going 24 hours if we have to. That's too much, Caleb protested. It's what's necessary. You'd do it for any of us. Stevens grabbed his shovel. Let's get back to work. The around-the-clock operation was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. The creek site never went dark, lit by lanterns and torches through the night shifts. People slept in 4-hour rotations, ate standing up, worked until their hands bled, and then kept working. The camaraderie that had built during the barn raising intensified under the pressure of the deadline and the shared understanding that they were fighting something bigger than one man's debt. They were fighting the idea that powerful men like Hayes could just take what they wanted, that money and connections trumped everything else, that ordinary people couldn't win against the system designed to favor the wealthy. Eliza worked the night shifts, helping sort ore and keep the sluice running, and found herself in conversations she'd never expected to have. Richardson talking about his father homesteading this land 70 years ago, building something from nothing through sheer stubborn determination. Stephen's wife sharing how Hayes had tried to force them off their ranch 5 years back, failed, and still held a grudge. Young families who'd moved west looking for opportunity and found instead a territory where one man seemed to own everything that mattered. "This is bigger than Turner's Ranch," Richardson said one night, shoveling ore while Eliza operated the sluice. "This is about whether any of us can hold on to what we've built. If Hayes can take Caleb's land through financial manipulation after failing legally, none of us are safe. Next month it'll be my ranch or Stevens's or someone else's. We stop him here, or we don't stop him at all." The gold accumulated, slowly, painfully, but it accumulated. By day 10, they had $300 worth. By day 14, $500. The jar was filling with gold dust and small nuggets, tangible proof that the deposit was real and substantial. But the human cost was mounting too. One of the hired workers collapsed from exhaustion and had to be sent home. Kate sprained her ankle hauling water and kept working on it anyway until Eliza physically removed her from the site. Sarah developed a cough from breathing rock dust that worried everyone, but which she refused to acknowledge. Caleb wasn't sleeping. Eliza could tell from the way he moved, the shadows under his eyes, the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. He was driving himself into the ground trying to coordinate everything, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he broke. She found him by the creek at 2 a.m. on day 16, just sitting on the bank watching the night shift work, looking utterly defeated. "You should be sleeping," she said, sitting next to him. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I run the numbers and they still don't work. We've got 13 days left, we're at $600, and even at our current pace, we'll be short." His voice was flat, empty. "We're going to fail. All this work, all these people helping, and we're still going to fail. We've got 13 days. A lot can happen in 13 days. Name one thing that would change our trajectory enough to matter." Eliza couldn't. The math was brutally simple. They needed $400 more in 13 days, which meant they needed to suddenly double their efficiency with exhausted workers using worn-out equipment on a deposit that was playing out. "I can't lose this ranch," Caleb said quietly. "It's all I have to give them. My girls, they've already lost their mother, already had to grow up too fast, already sacrificed too much. If I lose their home too, what does that make me? Human, fallible, someone who tried everything and ran into circumstances beyond his control." Eliza looked at the workers digging through the night. "But you're also someone who inspired all these people to fight alongside you. That's not nothing." "It's not enough either. Maybe not. But it's what we've got. So we keep going until the deadline, or until we physically can't anymore. That's the deal we made." He nodded, too tired to argue. They sat in silence, watching strangers work themselves to exhaustion for no payment beyond the shared belief that fighting was better than surrendering. Day 18 brought a breakthrough. One of Stevens's crew hit a pocket of nearly pure quartz crystal laced with visible gold. The excavation of that single pocket yielded $90 in a few hours, suddenly making the impossible seem almost achievable. By day 21, they had $850. Close enough to taste victory, but still agonizingly short with only 5 days remaining. Then disaster struck. The sluice broke, a critical joint giving way after 3 weeks of constant use. The equipment they'd been running 24 hours a day simply wore out, and without it, they couldn't process or efficiently enough to matter. Davis tried to repair it, but the damage was too extensive. "We need a new sluice. The old one's done." How long to get a new one till? Caleb asked. Order it from Denver, wait for shipping, 2 weeks minimum. We have 5 days. Then we're done. Without the sluice, we can dig all we want, but we can't process it fast enough to extract the gold. The silence that fell over the camp was crushing. They'd come so close. $850 when they needed $1,000, with gold literally in the ground, but no way to get it out fast enough. Sarah looked like she wanted to hit something. Kate was crying quietly. Lily just stood there, fists clenched, refusing to accept defeat even when it was staring them in the face. We build one, Lily said. What? Davis turned to her. We build a new sluice. We've got lumber from the barn rebuild. We've got metal hardware. We've got people who know carpentry. We build one. That'll take time we don't have. Then we build fast. Lily looked at her father. Pa, you've built fences and barns and fixed every broken thing on this ranch for years. You can build a sluice box in 5 days if you have to. Caleb looked at the broken equipment, at his youngest daughter refusing to give up, at the community that had worked themselves into the ground for him. Something in his expression shifted from defeat to determination. Get everyone together, he said. Everyone who knows carpentry, metalwork, or engineering. We're building a sluice box, and we're doing it in 3 days, so we have 2 days left to actually use it. What followed was 72 hours of controlled chaos. Half the crew kept digging, stockpiling ore for when the new sluice was ready. The other half built, working from Davis's rough sketches and collective experience to construct something that would work well enough to matter. Eliza watched Caleb transform during those 3 days. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by focused intensity as he directed construction, solved problems, adapted designs when materials didn't work as expected. This was what he did. He built things, fixed things, made solutions out of whatever was available. He'd been doing it his whole life, and watching him now, she understood why this ranch had survived 2 years without his wife, and 40 years before that through drought and market crashes and every other hardship the frontier threw at people. He was stubborn enough to keep trying when logic said to quit. The new sluice was finished on day 23 with 2 days left until the bank's deadline. It wasn't pretty, wasn't professional, but Davis tested it and declared it functional. They started processing the stockpiled ore immediately, running double shifts to make up for lost time. The gold came out in a rush. The ore they'd been accumulating while the sluice was being built turned out to be richer than expected, yielding gold faster than they'd been recovering before. By the end of day 24, they had $970, $30 short with 1 day left. They worked through that final night without stopping, processing every scrap of ore they could excavate, pushing the equipment and themselves past any reasonable limit. When dawn broke on day 25, Davis carefully weighed the accumulated gold and did the math. $1,040, he announced. The cheer that went up from the exhausted workers was something between celebration and relief, and the kind of laughter that comes when you've pushed past breaking and found yourself still standing on the other side. They'd done it. Against every reasonable expectation, with improvised equipment and community labor and sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit, they'd extracted enough gold to prove the deposit existed and pay the bank what they owed. Caleb stood holding the jar of gold dust and nuggets, looking like a man who couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Sarah hugged Kate, both of them crying. Lily pumped her fist in the air and shouted something triumphant that got lost in the noise. Eliza felt something break loose in her chest, some knot of tension she'd been carrying since Philadelphia, since Pemberton, since every time in her life when trying hard wasn't enough and the world kicked her down anyway. This time trying had been enough. This time they'd won. That afternoon, Caleb, Eliza, and Davis rode to town with the gold. They went first to the Territory Assay Office, where an official weighed and valued it, providing documentation that confirmed both the amount and the existence of a viable deposit. Then they went to the bank. Hayes's brother, the bank manager, looked genuinely shocked when they walked in. He'd clearly been expecting Caleb to come begging for more time or offering the deed in surrender. Instead, Caleb set the gold and documentation on his desk with a heavy thunk. "This is payment in full for the loan you called, plus interest through today." Caleb's voice was steady. "I'll also be closing all Turner family accounts and moving them to the bank in the next county, since it's become clear this institution doesn't value our business." The manager's face went through several interesting color changes. Mr. Turner, there's no need to be hasty. The loan call was simply standard procedure when your brother told you to financially destroy me because I beat him in court. I know how this works. Caleb pushed the papers across the desk. Process the payment. Give me a receipt showing the loan is satisfied. We're done here. They walked out of the bank 30 minutes later with documentation proving the Turner Ranch was free and clear of debt for the first time in years. Caleb stood on the street looking at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. We did it, he said, still sounding slightly stunned. We actually did it. You did it, Eliza corrected. You and your family and everyone who believed this was possible. No, we did it. All of us. Together. He looked at her. I couldn't have done this without you. The evidence from Morrison, the idea to mine the deposit, keeping everyone focused when I was falling apart. That was you. That was survival. I'm good at survival. You're good at a lot more than that. Caleb's expression was serious now. Eliza, I know you came here because you had nowhere else to go. You stayed because we needed help. But I'm hoping maybe now you'll stay because you want to. Because this is home, not just a place you're working. The word home settled into her chest, warm and terrifying. She'd spent so long not having one, not allowing herself to want one, that the idea of actually claiming a place felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away. But then, everything could be taken away. Hayes had tried to take the ranch through fraud, through fire, through financial manipulation, and they'd fought him off every time, not because they were guaranteed to win, but because the alternative was giving up what mattered. I want to stay, she said finally. If you'll have me, not as hired help anymore, as part of this, whatever this becomes. Caleb's smile was the most genuine thing she'd seen on his face since they'd met. Then welcome home, Eliza Hart. The celebration that night was small but meaningful. The family gathered around the kitchen table with Miguel, Jesse, and Davis, sharing the simple meal Sarah had prepared and talking about the future instead of just surviving the present. We've got enough gold left over after paying the bank to finish the barn properly and buy supplies for winter, Caleb said. The deposit's still viable. We could keep mining it, bring in enough to really set us up well. Or we could lease the mineral rights, Davis suggested. Let someone with proper equipment extract it, pay you a percentage. Less work, steady income, and you can focus on ranching instead of becoming miners. I like that option, Sarah said. I've had enough of digging through creek mud to last a lifetime. We should pay everyone who helped, Kate added. Fair shares for everyone who worked the claim. Already calculated it, Davis said, pulling out a ledger. After expenses and the bank payment, there's enough to give everyone who worked at least 3 months' wages. Maybe more if we're careful with the numbers. The conversation turned to practical details, but Eliza found herself watching the faces around the table more than listening to the words. These people had become her family without her quite noticing when it happened. Sarah, who'd gone from suspicious to sisterly. Kate and Lily, who'd started asking her advice about things that had nothing to do with housework. Miguel and Jesse, who'd nodded silent acceptance when she'd first arrived and now included her in their conversations about the ranch's future. And Caleb, who looked at her now like she was essential, not temporary, like she belonged here not because she was useful, but because she was wanted. Later, when everyone else had gone to bed, Eliza stood on the porch one final time, looking out at land she could finally call home. The new barn was a dark shape against the stars, incomplete but standing. The creek where they'd fought for survival glinted in moonlight. The house behind her was full of people who'd fight for each other because that's what family did. She'd come here with nothing, expecting nothing, just trying to survive one more day in a world that kept knocking her down. She'd found something she hadn't known she was looking for, people worth fighting for, a place worth defending, and the understanding that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones that mattered most. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, passing one over without a word. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that only came when you'd been through fire together and come out the other side. Hayes will try again, Caleb said eventually. Men like him don't give up just because they lost once. Probably, but next time we'll be ready, and we'll fight him the same way we fought him this time, together, with everything we've got, refusing to quit until we've won or there's nothing left to fight with. That's a hard way to live. Better than the alternative. He nodded slowly. Sarah's going back to school next month. She's nervous about it, leaving the ranch after running it for so long. But she's also excited, which I haven't seen her be about anything in 2 years. She'll do well. She's smart and determined, and she's earned the chance to be 16 instead of 30. Kate wants to learn bookkeeping properly, manage the ranch accounts. Lily's talking about raising horses, breeding and training them for sale. Caleb smiled. They're thinking about futures instead of just surviving the present. That's because of you, you know. You gave them permission to hope again. I didn't do anything except show up and refuse to leave. Sometimes that's everything. He was quiet for a moment. Eliza, I don't know what this is between us. I know you work here. I know we've been through hell together. I know my girls adore you. But I also know that when I think about the future, you're in it, not as an employee, as something more. Her heart was suddenly beating too fast. Caleb, you don't have to say anything now. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place here for you that's not about work or obligation. It's about building something together that's worth keeping. He went inside, leaving her alone with thoughts that were too big and complicated to process all at once. She'd come here looking for a job and found a home. She'd expected temporary and gotten permanent. She'd braced for rejection and received belonging. The frontier had a way of stripping everything down to what mattered most. Out here, you couldn't hide behind social conventions or pretend to be something you weren't. You either showed up and did the work, or you didn't survive. You either built something worth fighting for, or you drifted until circumstances consumed you. Eliza had spent her whole life drifting, taking whatever came, surviving but not living. She'd left Philadelphia chasing a promise that turned out to be a lie, and somehow that lie had led her to a truth she hadn't known to look for. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, building, becoming part of something larger than herself. The night was quiet except for the usual sounds of a working ranch settling down for sleep. Horses moving in the new barn, chickens muttering in their coop, the wind rustling through grass that would need cutting before winter. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary place doing extraordinary things just by continuing to exist in a world that kept trying to erase it. Eliza finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and went inside to the room that had become hers. The bed didn't sag as much anymore. Caleb had fixed it without being asked. The window unstuck itself after Sarah oiled the frame. Small improvements that added up to comfort, to permanence, to home. She lay in bed listening to the house breathe around her, 3 girls sleeping down the hall, their father in the room below, ranch hands in the bunkhouse, land stretching out in all directions that was safely theirs now. Protected, defended, won through stubbornness and community, and the refusal to accept that power always won. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes ordinary people with nothing but determination in each other could stand against men like Hayes and win. Not easily, not cleanly, but definitively. That was worth remembering, worth building on, worth fighting for every single day. Eliza closed her eyes and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years, safe. Not because everything was perfect or because all their problems were solved, but because she was surrounded by people who would fight for her the same way she'd fought for them. Because she'd found a place that needed her not just for what she could do, but for who she was. Because after a lifetime of being abandoned and dismissed and told she didn't matter, she'd finally found people who proved otherwise just by choosing to stand beside her when it would have been easier to walk away. The morning would bring new challenges. The ranch would need work, Hayes would need watching, winter would need preparing for. Life would continue with all its complications and demands. But for tonight, for this moment, Eliza Hart let herself be happy. Let herself believe that the future might actually be something worth looking forward to instead of just something to survive. She'd come here with nothing and built everything that mattered. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and keep building. Because that's what you did when you finally found something worth keeping. You showed up. You did the work. You refused to quit. You made it home.